What if the beginning of human history is not hidden because someone buried it, but because only certain fragments were ever allowed to survive? You stand in the hush of a museum gallery after the daytime crowd has thinned. The floor is polished stone. The air feels cool and still. Somewhere above you, lights hum softly over glass cases filled with clay tablets, carved seals, broken statues, bronze tools, and fragments of temples that once stood beneath a hotter sky. The labels are calm. They give you dates, places, dynasties, materials, excavation numbers, and careful descriptions shaped by generations of archaeologists, historians, epigraphers, and museum curators. Nothing here shouts, nothing declares a secret, and yet, in the quiet space between one object and the next, you may begin to feel a question forming. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, let your attention return to the case in front of you. Inside it rests a small clay tablet, no larger than a hand. Its surface is marked with tiny wedge-shaped signs, pressed into damp clay by a reed stylus more than 4,000 years ago. The marks look almost mechanical at first, like an ancient code, each impression angled with a precise pressure of wrist and tool. Yet every sign was made by a living hand. Someone sat under the heat of southern Mesopotamia, beside canals and mud brick walls, with the smell of wet clay, smoke, reeds, and river water in the air. Someone recorded grain, labour, offerings, names, debts, songs, omens, kings, gods, and fears. The world that produced those marks was not silent. It was crowded with voices. Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria did not leave us one neat book of history. They left fragments, thousands of fragments, temple records, royal inscriptions, myths copied by scribes, school exercises, omen lists, legal cases, hymns, letters, and broken lines that begin in the middle of something and end before the meaning is complete. The result is not a straight road into the past. It is more like walking through a ruined archive by torchlight, lifting one tablet after another, never certain whether the next piece belongs to a song, a tax account, a prayer, or a story about the gods descending among humans. And among those gods, one name has travelled far beyond the clay where it first appeared. The Anunnaki. In mainstream scholarship, the Anunnaki are understood as a group of deities in Mesopotamian religion, connected in different periods with heaven, earth, the underworld, judgment, authority, and the divine order. Their role shifts depending on the text, the city, and the age of the copy. Sometimes they appear as great gods, sometimes as a collective assembly, sometimes they are associated with the underworld. Sometimes they stand near the highest powers of the divine world. They are not simple. They are not fixed. They belong to a religious imagination that changed across centuries. As temples rose, cities competed, and languages reshaped older names into new patterns. But outside the careful world of scholarship, the Anunnaki have gathered another kind of shadow. Some have wondered whether ancient references to powerful beings from the heavens preserve a distorted memory of visitors, rulers, teachers, or forces not fully understood by early humanity. Others have imagined hidden artifacts stored in museum basements, objects too strange to display, tablets too controversial to translate openly, relics that might suggest a deeper timeline beneath accepted history. These ideas belong to the mistier edge of interpretation. They are not established history. They are not something a responsible guide can present as fact. But the persistence of such questions tells us something important. The ancient record is fragmentary, and where the record breaks, imagination begins to breathe. Museums, after all, are not only places of display, they are also places of selection. For every artifact under clean glass, many more remain in storage, some are too damaged, Some are still awaiting study. Some are duplicates. Some have uncertain origins. Some came through old excavation systems shaped by empire, wealth, conflict, and the hunger of the 19th and 20th century collectors. Some objects carry labels written decades ago, when archaeology was different, when local voices were often ignored, when the desire to fill European and American galleries sometimes moved faster than the desire to preserve full context. This is one of the first quiet truths of the museum world. Most hiding is not dramatic. It is administrative. It is dust, backlog, funding, language, broken records, missing provenance, and the slow work of reading clay. A tablet may wait years before being fully translated. A fragment may sit in a drawer because no one has yet recognized the text it belongs to. A seal may be known only by a catalogue number until a specialist notices that its tiny scene resembles another image found hundreds of miles away. In this way, the past is not always hidden by a locked door. Sometimes it is hidden by the simple fact that there is too much of it, and too few hands able to listen. Still, the question remains, if the museums of the world contain more Mesopotamian artifacts than the public will ever see, what might be resting quietly beyond the gallery lights? You imagine a storage room below the public floor. Shelves rise in grey rows. Drawers slide open with a soft scrape. Inside are tablets wrapped in tissue, seal impressions in trays, broken divine figurines, fragments of inscriptions, and small clay cones once placed in temple walls. The air is dry. The labels are handwritten, typed, revised, crossed out, corrected. Some objects have known histories. Others have long gaps between the soil that held them and the museum that keeps them now. Each gap is a kind of silence, and silence can be fertile ground. It may be that what feels hidden is not a single forbidden artifact, but a pattern not yet fully seen, a scattered line in one museum, a seal in another, a damaged myth in a third collection, a king list copied centuries after the events it claims to remember, a divine name that changes shape from one city to the next, a strange figure in a horned crown, standing beneath stars or beside a tree, holding a rod, a ring, a flowing vessel, or a creature with wings. Alone, each object is explainable. Together, they seem to ask for a larger story. That story does not need to be loud. It can begin with clay. It can begin with the ordinary care of a scribe pressing signs into mud, never knowing that one day the tablet would sit under glass, watched by people from countries he could not imagine. It can begin with a curator turning a small object in gloved hands, trying to decide whether the figure carved into it is a god, a king, a worshipper, or a symbol whose meaning changed long ago. It can begin with the river plains of Mesopotamia, where people built cities from earth and water, gave offerings to unseen powers, and tried to understand why life depended on forces larger than themselves. You stand before the case a little longer. The museum does not answer you. It only reflects your shape faintly in the glass. Behind that reflection, the tablet waits, brown, cracked, patient, and strangely awake. Its marks are not moving, yet they seem to hold the memory of hands, temples, kings, floods, prayers, and gods whose names still trouble the edge of sleep. Perhaps the secret is not that museums are hiding the Anunnaki. Perhaps the secret is that the fragments we already have are still not fully understood. You begin not inside the museum, but far away from it, in the low, sun-warmed plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the land once breathed with canals, date palms, reed beds, mud brick walls, and the slow brown shimmer of water. The air is heavy with dust and heat. A wind moves across the flat fields, carrying the scent of dry reeds, animal dung, baked clay, and smoke from cooking fires. Somewhere nearby, workers are repairing a canal bank with baskets of mud. Children move barefoot through narrow lanes. Donkeys shift under loads of grain. Priests climb temple stairs in linen garments, and scribes sit with damp clay resting on their palms. ready to turn speech into marks that might outlast the speaker. This is the world that gave museums many of their quietest treasures. Not gold crowns at first, not giant statues, not shining weapons. Clay. Clay was everywhere in ancient Mesopotamia. The rivers brought it. The floodplain shaped it. People built with it, sealed jars with it, made bricks from it, pressed contracts into it, and wrote their stories upon it. In a land where stone was scarce in the south, clay became memory. It was soft enough to receive a sign, then hard enough to survive fire, collapse, burial, and thousands of years beneath the soil. You imagine a scribe preparing a tablet. He takes a small lump of wet clay and presses it flat. It is cool against the skin, almost alive, carrying the moisture of the river. He holds a reed stylus cut to a clean angle. With each movement, he presses tiny wedges into the surface. The signs are not pictures in the simple sense. They are part of a writing system that developed from earlier counting marks into cuneiform, one of the oldest known writing traditions in the world. It served many languages over time, including Sumerian and Akkadian, and for centuries it carried the administrative, religious, legal, and literary life of cities. The first records were often practical: grain counted, sheep listed, labour assigned, beer distributed, land measured, offerings recorded. The earlier cities needed systems, and writing grew among those systems like reeds beside water. Yet practical records did not remain merely practical. The same technique that counted barley could also preserve hymns to Inanna, myths of creation, royal boasts, laments for ruined cities, and stories of kings whose names drift between history and legend. In those lists of kings, the atmosphere changes. You find a line of rulers said to have reigned before a great flood. Their reigns stretch into numbers that feel impossible to a modern mind. Thousands of years, tens of thousands. The Sumerian king list, copied in later periods from older traditions, places kingship as something that descended from heaven, moving from city to city as if political authority were not merely human but part of a cosmic arrangement. Scholars study the list carefully, seeing in it a blend of memory, ideology, myth, political theology, and dynastic imagination. It is not read as a simple factual timeline. Its numbers and structure raise debates about symbolism, ancient mathematics, legitimacy, and the way later rulers frame the past. Still, when you hear that phrase, kingship descended from heaven, something in the gallery of the mind grows quiet. It does not need to mean a spacecraft or a literal descent from the stars. It may reflect the ancient belief that order itself came from the divine realm, that cities did not simply organize themselves, but received their authority through powers beyond human hands. And yet, some modern interpreters have lingered over those words, wondering whether the old scribes were preserving a memory they no longer fully understood, a memory of teachers, founders, or beings from an earlier age whose presence became wrapped in divine language. The careful answer is that the record is fragmentary, layered, and shaped by belief. The more mysterious answer is that belief sometimes preserves shadows of events that no longer have names. You walk through the imagined city as evening gathers. Mud brick walls turn the colour of warm ash. The surface of the canal darkens. The ziggurat rises above the settlement, not like a pyramid in the later Egyptian sense, but like a stepped mountain of brick, a raised platform between earth and sky. At its summit or near its sacred precinct, offerings are brought: grain, oil, wool, animals, and crafted goods move through temple households that are both religious and economic centres. The gods are not distant ideas. They are woven into the structure of daily survival. A farmer depends on water. Water depends on canals. Canals depend on labour. Labour depends on organisation. Organisation depends on authority. Authority is given meaning by gods, and somewhere in this chain the Anunnaki take their place. Their name appears differently across texts and periods. Sometimes they are associated with the great gods, sometimes with the divine judges, sometimes with the underworld. Their identity is not a single clear portrait. It is more like a reflection on moving river water. You can see shapes, but the shapes shift when the current changes. This is one reason museums often present Mesopotamian divine objects cautiously. A horned crown may mark divinity. A seated figure may be a god. A smaller figure may be a worshipper. A symbol may point to a known deity, or perhaps to a local version of a deity whose full story has been lost. The label must be short. The uncertainty behind it is not. You pause beside the thought of a small statue discovered without its full context. Perhaps it came from a temple deposit, perhaps from a shrine, perhaps from a market of antiquities long after it left the ground. Its eyes are wide, inlaid once with shell or stone. Its hands are clasped. Its body is still. Such statues from ancient Mesopotamia are often understood as votive figures, placed in temples to stand in perpetual prayer before the deity. In a public museum, they look as though they are staring at you. In their original world, they may have been watching for the gods. Here the fringe imagination finds another doorway. Some have wondered why so many ancient figures have such enlarged eyes. Were they symbols of devotion, wakefulness, and ritual attention, as many scholars suggest? Or did later mystery writers see in them the memory of beings who looked different from ordinary humans? The scholarly explanation is stronger, grounded in context, comparison, and temple practice. But the unease remains because the figures do not feel casual. They feel alert, as if created for a conversation that never ended. The city settles into night. Reeds whisper along the water. Dogs bark in the distance. From a courtyard, the smell of bread and beer rises into cooling air. Above the roofs, the sky opens wide and dark. The stars are not decorative. They are part of order, omen, timing, and divine presence. Mesopotamian scholars of later centuries would become careful watchers of the heavens, recording celestial events with remarkable dedication. But even in the older imagination, the sky was not empty. It was a realm of signs. You think again of tablets in museums, stored in drawers, translated slowly, compared patiently. Their power is not only in what they say, it is in the way they survived as broken parts of a much larger archive. No single tablet can give back the ancient world. No single museum can hold the full memory of Sumer. Every object is a survivor from a vanished system, like one gear from a machine buried under sand. And if that machine once described gods, kings, labour, heaven, flood, creation, and the descent of authority, then even its broken pieces are enough to make you wonder, not because they prove a hidden history, because they remind you how much history can disappear while leaving only clay behind. You leave the open gallery in your imagination and pass through a door most visitors never notice. It is not dramatic. There is no carved warning, no guard in ceremonial silence, no secret symbol cut into the frame. It is only a staff door, plain and practical, with a small panel of glass and a card reader beside the handle. Beyond it, the museum changes its breathing. The polished calm of the public floor gives way to service corridors, painted walls, carts with padded trays, shelves of packing material, conservation rooms, offices, and long storage areas where the past waits without theatrical lighting. Here, ancient objects do not perform for you. They rest. You move quietly through an aisle between metal cabinets. The air is dry and carefully controlled. It smells faintly of cardboard, archival paper, cotton gloves, old dust, and the clean sharpness of conservation materials. Somewhere, a drawer opens and closes with a soft metallic slide. A curator checks a number against a database. A conservator studies a surface under magnification, watching for salt crystals, old repairs, flaking pigment, or damage caused by earlier handling. The work is patient. It has very little of the mystery that popular stories imagine. Yet in its patience there is a deeper kind of mystery. Most museum collections are much larger than what the public sees. This is not unusual, and it is not automatically suspicious. Museums collect, preserve, study, lend, rotate, and protect objects. Fragile items may be kept away from light. Repeated examples may not all be displayed. Some artifacts are too damaged to make sense in a gallery. Others need conservation before they can be shown. Some belong to research collections where scholars compare marks, forms, materials, inscriptions, and excavation records. A museum gallery is not the whole archive. It is only a visible surface, but surfaces can mislead. You stop beside a drawer marked with accession numbers. Inside, small clay tablets sit in individual supports. Some are whole, some are cracked. Some are nothing more than corners, edges, or flakes of writing. To an untrained eye, they look almost identical. Brown clay, wedge marks, tiny breaks. Yet to a specialist, each one may hold a place name, a personal name, a divine title, a measure of grain, a temple account, a legal formula, a line from a myth, or a clue that connects one city to another. A single fragment can change the reading of a text, but only if someone recognizes it. This is where the idea of hidden Anunnaki artifacts becomes quieter and more complicated. The most likely hidden things are not glowing relics or forbidden machines. They're unstudied fragments, incomplete translations, uncertain catalogue entries, objects separated from their original excavation context, and items acquired in periods when collecting practices were less careful than they are expected to be today. A tablet might mention a divine group, but without the beginning or ending of the text, its meaning remains open. A seal might show a divine assembly, but without the inscription or site context, the figures resist firm identification. The public label may say, Mesopotamian cylinder seal, 3rd millennium before the Common Era. The unanswered questions may fill a room. Who owned it? Was it administrative, ritual, personal, or official? Was the seated figure a deity, a ruler, or a symbolic authority? Are the stars above the scene astronomical, divine, decorative, or all three? Does the horned crown identify one god, many gods, or divine status in general? Was the object found in a controlled excavation, or did it pass through the market before anyone recorded its story? A label must be concise, as provenance can be wounded. You walk deeper into the storeroom. The silence feels different from the gallery silence. In the gallery, silence is shaped for visitors. Here, silence is functional. It protects concentration. It protects materials. It protects the slow process of doubt. You see boxes from old excavations. Some have labels written in careful ink by people long dead. Others carry newer barcodes. The museum itself becomes a layered document, showing changes in scholarship, ethics, politics, and preservation. And there is a mainstream truth here that is easy to overlook. Archaeology is not only the discovery of objects, it is the recovery of relationships. A cup beside a hearth matters differently from a cup in a tomb. A tablet found in a schoolroom speaks differently from a tablet found in a temple archive. A figurine uncovered in a domestic space may suggest different practices than one sealed inside a foundation deposit. When an object is removed from its context, the object remains, but many of its meanings become harder to hear. That loss has fed many modern mysteries. Some have wondered whether certain Mesopotamian objects appear strange because their true meaning has been intentionally softened. Others suspect that museum language turns the extraordinary into the ordinary by calling everything ritual, symbolic, administrative, or mythological. There is a curious fringe tidbit in this suspicion, because it grows from a real frustration. Ancient objects often do feel more alive than their labels. A divine figure holding a rod and ring may seem charged with authority beyond a simple description. A tablet describing heavenly kingship may feel larger than political ideology. A hybrid creature carved in stone may seem like evidence of a world not easily reduced to metaphor. Yet careful scholarship must move slowly. A winged being is not proof of wings in the literal world. A god descending is not proof of a physical descent. A long reign is not proof of a biological lifespan. Mythic language may preserve social memory, ritual meaning, political legitimacy, cosmic order, or poetic imagination. The difficulty is that these categories can overlap. Ancient people did not always divide history, theology, symbol, and royal power the way modern museums do. What looks like myth may have organized law. What looks like symbol may have shaped agriculture. What looks like ritual may have supported government. The uncertainty is not a weakness. It is part of the artifact. You pause at a conservation table where a small clay cone lies beneath a lamp. Such cones were sometimes inscribed and placed in the walls of temples by rulers who wanted their building works remembered. Their texts often speak in formal language, naming kings, gods, and sacred construction. A museum visitor might pass one quickly. It lacks the immediate drama of a statue or jewel. But imagine it in its original place, buried inside a wall, never meant for ordinary eyes. It was a message to the divine, to the future, to whoever might one day rebuild the temple and find the name of the king still pressed into clay. An object can be hidden by design without being secret in the modern sense. Ancient foundations often contain deposits meant to preserve memory beneath buildings. Temples could hold buried offerings. Seals could secure storerooms. Tablets could be archived for administration, not display. The ancient world already had its own forms of concealment, preservation, and restricted access. Not everything was made for public seeing. Some things were meant for gods, priests, scribes, or future restorers. When such objects enter museums, their original privacy becomes public, but only partly. Something of their silence remains. You turn toward another shelf. There are fragments of divine statues here. Broken hands, feet, eyes, crowns, pieces of beards, bits of robes carved in stone. Some damage came from time, some from collapse, some from conquest, some from reuse, some perhaps from ritual treatment that is still debated. Scholars continue to ask why certain images were broken in particular ways, whether by invaders, political enemies, later builders, or acts meant to deactivate the power of an image. The debate matters because in Mesopotamia, statues were not always viewed as mere representations. Cult images could be treated as living presences after ritual activation, clothed, fed, honoured, and moved with ceremony. To a modern visitor, a broken statue is art. To its ancient caretakers, it may have been a body, and if divine images could be bodies, then a museum's storeroom of fragments begins to feel less like storage and more like a quiet gathering of injured presences. This is only a feeling, not a conclusion. But bedtime history often lives in that borderland where knowledge and feeling touch without becoming the same thing. You stand still among the cabinets. Nothing forbidden appears. No hidden chamber opens. No curator whispers that the old gods were real in the way modern fantasy would like them to be. Instead, the mystery becomes slower, more human, and perhaps more haunting. Museums may be hiding less by intention than by limitation. Their drawers hold objects not yet studied, contexts not fully recovered, names not confidently read, meanings not settled, and fragments of divine worlds whose original voices have thinned into catalogued notes. And somewhere among those notes, the Anunnaki remain difficult to place. Not absent, not fully visible, waiting in the space between inscription, interpretation, and the long patience of clay. You find yourself standing before a figure with eyes too still to feel empty. It is not large. It does not need to be. The body is carved in a posture of careful attention, hands gathered near the chest, shoulders narrow, feet planted as though the figure has been waiting for a very long time. The face is simple at first glance, yet the eyes widen in a way that makes the room feel quieter around them. They are not the eyes of a portrait meant to flatter a person. They are the eyes of someone, or something, made to remain awake. The stone has cooled under the museum lights. Its surface carries the faint roughness of age, and if you imagine touching it, you can almost feel the grain of the material beneath your fingertips, worn by time, handling, burial, recovery, and display. A label might call it a votive figure from ancient Mesopotamia, perhaps from a temple context, perhaps dedicated by a worshipper. It might explain that such figures were placed before the gods, standing in lasting prayer when the human donor could not be physically present. That explanation is grounded and deeply human, and still, the object unsettles you. You look at the clasped hands, you look at the straight posture, you look at the eyes again. In early Mesopotamian art, especially from sites such as Tel Asmai, votive statues often show exaggerated eyes, sometimes inlaid with shell, black limestone, or other materials. Scholars commonly understand these eyes as signs of devotion, watchfulness, awe, or ritual attention. These figures were not casual decorations. They belonged to a world where temples were living centers of divine presence, economic power, and communal hope. To stand before a god was not metaphorical in the modern sense. It was an act of survival, dependence, and order. The people who made such images lived in cities where harvests could fail, canals could silt, kings could fall, disease could pass through households, and enemies could appear beyond the fields. To be seen by the deity mattered. To remain represented before the deity mattered. The statue was a substitute body, a quiet petitioner, an artificial witness. Yet this is also where imagination begins to lean closer. Some modern mystery writers have looked at these large eyes and wondered whether they preserve a memory of beings who are not quite human. They point to the difference between ordinary bodies and strangely intensified faces, to the stillness of the posture, to the almost otherworldly presence of figures set apart from daily life. Such readings are not accepted as historical evidence. The stronger explanation remains ritual symbolism, artistic convention, and temple practice. But one reason the fringe idea survives is that these objects do not feel ordinary. They were made to face power, and perhaps that alone is enough to make them appear touched by something beyond the human scale. You move along the display and see another image, this one carved on a relief or impressed on a seal. A figure sits on a throne, taller than the attendants who approach. A horned crown rises from the head. The body is human in form, but the signs around it change the meaning. Horned crowns in Mesopotamian art often mark divinity. A god can be shown seated, receiving worship, holding a vessel, a rod, a ring, a weapon, or another symbol of authority, around the figure. Smaller forms may carry offerings, lead animals, pour libations, or stand in careful arrangement. The scene is ordered. Nothing appears accidental. In the ancient cities of Sumer and Akkad, images were not simply illustrations. They participated in systems of meaning. A cylinder seal rolled across wet clay could identify an owner, secure property, authorize an action, or express religious devotion. A divine figure on such a seal might not tell a story in the way a modern picture book does. It might compress status, belief, office, and cosmic hierarchy into a space no wider than your thumb. You imagine the seal in a hand. It is small, cool, and smooth from use. The owner presses it into damp clay, closing a jar, a tablet envelope, or a storeroom door. As it rolls, the image unfolds like a tiny procession. A god appears, a worshipper approaches, a star hovers, a sacred animal turns its head. The impression dries, and the clay holds not only a practical mark but a miniature universe of authority. When museums display such seals, they often show both the object and its modern impression, because the carved stone itself can be difficult to read. The real image appears only when rolled. This is a beautiful and curious fact, one that feels almost like a metaphor for Mesopotamian religion itself. The meaning is not visible from one angle. It must be turned, pressed, translated, and reconstructed. And even then, some things remain uncertain. Scholars continue to debate the identity of figures on many seals and reliefs. A horned crown may indicate divine status, but not always the specific deity. A symbol beside a figure may help. but symbols can shift across region and time. A scene once thought to represent one myth may later be reinterpreted as ritual, royal ideology, or a more general divine audience. The same image can hold layers. A god may also represent a city. A throne may represent cosmic order. A tree may be a sacred symbol, a stylized plant, a mythic axis, or part of a ritual scene whose words are lost. You step closer in your mind. The museum light glints faintly along the carved lines. There is no movement, yet the figures seem arranged for an event that has not ended, a divine assembly, a judgment, a bestowal of authority, a human being brought into the presence of powers older than the city walls. This is where the Anunnaki become difficult to imagine clearly, because they are not always one god with one face. They are a collective, a category, a group whose functions change across texts and periods. They may be invoked as great gods. They may be connected with judgment. They may belong to the upper world in some contexts and the underworld in others. A collective is harder to carve than a single face. Perhaps this is why the Anunnaki often feel hidden, even when Mesopotamian divine images are visible. You may be looking at a god connected to their wider world without knowing whether the image touches that name directly. You may see the grammar of their universe rather than their portraits. Thrones, crowns, stars, divine attendants, offerings, gates, mountains, and flowing vessels may form the visual environment in which such beings were imagined. But the label cannot always say more than it knows. Still, there are images that keep inviting unusual questions. A figure with streams flowing from the shoulders or a vessel, a deity standing on a mountain form, a god associated with wisdom, subterranean waters, or creation, hybrid creatures guarding thresholds, Apkallu figures, the sage-like beings of later Mesopotamian tradition, sometimes shown with wings or fish-like cloaks, carrying buckets and cone-shaped objects. In mainstream interpretation, such beings belong to protective, ritual, and mythological traditions. They are not the Anunnaki themselves in any simple way, and their meanings vary by period. Yet modern fringe imagination has often blended them together, seeing in all unusual divine or semi-divine forms a possible trace of advanced visitors, genetic memory, or hidden teaching. The responsible mind separates these strands. The dreaming mind notices that ancient art is full of watchers, guardians, mediators, and beings who stand between categories, human and divine, animal and human, earth and sky, temple and underworld. Memory and invention, you let the room grow dimmer around the objects. The statues no longer feel like isolated artworks. They begin to feel like survivors from a society where the unseen world was organized as carefully as the city itself. Gods had households, temples had economies, priests had duties, kings claimed divine favor, scribes preserved names in clay, images received offerings, rituals opened the mouth of statues and transformed crafted matter into sacred presence. The line between object and being was not the same line you draw today. That difference matters, because when a museum places a divine statue behind glass, it protects the object but changes the relationship. The ancient viewer may have approached with fear, need, prayer, or offering. You approach with curiosity. The ancient temple may have understood the image as inhabited by presence after ritual care. You see a catalogued artifact, a fragment of religious history, perhaps a work of art. Both views reveal something. Neither fully restores the original encounter. The figure with watchful eyes remains before you. It does not tell you whether the Anunnaki were gods of theology, memories of power, names for cosmic offices, or symbols later reshaped by modern longing. It does not solve the debate over how ancient people understood divine beings in relation to human rulers and human labor. It does not confirm the secret hopes of those who search for hidden artifacts behind museum walls. It simply watches, and perhaps that is why it stays with you. Not because it reveals everything, but because it refuses to become merely old stone. Its stillness carries the pressure of a world in which humans believed they were seen by powers greater than themselves, judged by them, fed by them, frightened by them, and perhaps made meaningful through them. You leave the case slowly. Behind you, the figure remains awake in the glass, with hands folded forever before an unseen god. You come now to the problem of names, not the kind of problem that looks difficult at first, with broken signs and missing corners, but the quieter kind that grows more difficult the longer you sit with it. A name seems simple. It appears on clay. A scholar transliterates it. A museum label places it beside an object. A visitor reads it and feels, for a moment, that something ancient has been brought under control. And Enlil, Enki, Inanna, Ninhursag, Reshkigal, the Anunnaki. The names rest in the mind like stones laid in a path. Yet when you begin to walk that path, you notice that it bends. Some names change across languages. Some gods carry older forms beneath later forms. Some deities merge, separate, rise, decline, borrow functions, trade symbols, or become more important when the city that worshipped them becomes more powerful. A god in one period is not always exactly the same god in another. A title can become a name can become a title. A local divine presence can be gathered into a wider religious system and made to speak in a new way. You imagine a scribe in a tablet house, copying an old hymn from a damaged original. His hand is steady, but he's not a machine. He is part of a living tradition. He knows certain names through teaching, ritual, political memory, and inherited reverence. He may preserve an older phrase without fully understanding its earlier setting. He may update language. He may follow a school tradition. He may copy what stands before him because that is what a scribe does, even when the meaning has already become ancient to him. This is one reason Mesopotamian religion can feel so deep and uncertain. The clay is old, but the stories written on it may be older than the clay itself. A tablet from a later century can preserve a myth with roots in a much earlier world. A museum object may belong to one period, while the idea attached to it reaches backward through generations of ritual speech. You're not looking at a single moment. You're looking at layers of remembering. The Anunnaki live within those layers. In many texts, their name appears as a collective of divine beings, but their exact number, rank, and role are not always stable. In some traditions, they are great gods associated with authority and cosmic order. In others, they appear in connection with judgment or the underworld. In certain compositions, the Agigi appear as another group of gods, sometimes associated with heavenly or labouring divine beings. And later readers have tried to understand how these groups relate to one another. The boundaries are not always neat. Scholars debate the development of these divine categories, and the evidence does not always allow a single clean answer. That uncertainty has become a doorway. Some modern mystery traditions take the shifting nature of these names as evidence that the ancient texts are hiding a more concrete reality behind religious language. Perhaps they suggest gods were offices. Perhaps divine names referred to ruling groups. Perhaps the Anunnaki were remembered as a class of powerful beings whose nature became mythologized over time. These are interpretive possibilities at the edge of speculation, not established conclusions, but they grow from a real feature of the record. Mesopotamian divine language is fluid, layered, and often difficult to map onto modern categories. You look at a museum label again. It might say, figure of a god, or deity with horned headdress, or scene of worship before a seated divinity. It may not name the god at all. This restraint can feel unsatisfying, but it is honest. The curator may recognize divinity through the horned crown, posture, or symbols, yet still avoid naming a specific being without enough evidence. The label's silence is not necessarily concealment. Sometimes it is a form of care. Still, names have power. In ancient Mesopotamia, names were not casual tags. To name a god was to place oneself within a network of obligation, protection, fear, and meaning. Temples were dedicated to named powers. Kings built for named powers. Cities were guarded by named powers. Hymns praised their qualities in long, shimmering phrases. A god could be called Lord of the Lands, Lady of Heaven, Keeper of Decrees, Master of Fresh Waters, Judge of the Dead, or Great Mountain. Each title opened a different doorway. You hear the name An, or Anu in later Akkadian form, and you feel height, sky, distant authority, a divine father whose presence may be more cosmic than intimate. You hear Enlil, and the air seems to gather around wind, command, storm, kingship, and the force that separates and orders. You hear Enki, or Ea in Akkadian, and the ground grows wet beneath your feet, filled with freshwater depths, wisdom, craft, creation, and cunning help. You hear Inanna, later associated with Ishtar, and the atmosphere sharpens with love, war, desire, power, and the dangerous brilliance of the morning and evening star. These are not modern characters in a simple story. They are vast accumulations of cult, poetry, politics, and memory. The Anunnaki do not stand apart from this world like strangers dropped into it. They are woven into it. Their name belongs to the same religious imagination that placed divine power in the sky, in storms, in underground waters, in fertility, in death, in kingship, and in the fragile order of cities. If hidden artifacts connected to them exist in museum storage, they may not announce themselves with the word Anunnaki clearly marked on the surface. They may appear instead through signs of divine assembly, judgment scenes, names in a broken line, or theological patterns that only become visible when texts are placed beside images and ritual objects. This is why the idea of a single secret Anunnaki artifact may be too simple. The deeper mystery may be distributed. A phrase here, a seal there, a damaged god list in one collection, a foundation inscription in another, a ritual text copied far from the city where its tradition began, a myth preserved in a school tablet by a student whose mistakes are still visible in clay. Each piece names something, but not completely. Each title points toward a structure, but the structure is partly missing. You begin to understand how ancient religion survives not as a cathedral still standing, but as scattered stones from many walls. And yet, there is a curious fringe tidbit that refuses to fade. Some writers have suggested that when ancient texts describe gods dividing responsibilities, assigning labour, controlling destinies, and shaping humanity for service, they may be preserving the memory of a ruling order that was later translated into divine myth. In this reading, names like Enlil and Enki become not only gods but offices within a hierarchy, almost like cosmic administrators. This idea can be intriguing as story, but it must be held softly. The ancient texts themselves are theological and poetic. Their categories are not ours. To turn them too quickly into hidden technology or political reports is to flatten their strangeness. The more patient reading allows both wonder and restraint. You sit with the fact that ancient people used divine names to explain how the world held together. The gods were not merely above nature. They were within the order of nature, society, ritual, and fate. The divine world mirrored the city, and the city mirrored the divine world. Councils of gods resembled assemblies of power. Temple economies resembled households of gods. Kings ruled as human agents beneath a larger authority. In that mirror, the Anunnaki could appear as a council, a lineage, a judgment body, or a distant family of powers whose full arrangement changed with time. The open debate remains because the evidence is wide but uneven. Some texts are clear in one way and confusing in another. Some names are preserved in lists without stories. Some stories survive in copies made centuries after their first telling. Some objects have no written explanation at all. When modern readers ask who the Anunnaki really were, scholarship often answers by asking in which text, in which city, in which century, in which language, under which theological system. It is a slower answer, but it is also truer to the clay. You feel the museum air around you again. The glass case reflects a faint outline of your face beside the names printed on the label. You realize that even now, thousands of years later, names still shape what you're allowed to imagine. Call a figure a god, and you enter religion. Call it a ruler, and you enter politics. Call it a visitor, and you enter mystery. Call it a symbol, and you enter interpretation. The object does not change, but the word beside it changes the path your mind takes. Perhaps that is why names are among the most delicate artifacts of all. They can be translated, but never fully removed from the world that made them. They can be printed on labels, but not exhausted by labels. They can travel into modern books, videos, theories, and dreams, carrying both knowledge and distortion. The Anunnaki, as a name, has travelled very far from its oldest clay settings. It has become scholarly term, mythic echo, fringe magnet, and late-night question. You let the name settle into silence. And the height, Enlil, the command, Enki, the deep water, Inanna, the bright danger, the Anunnaki, the gathered powers whose edges remain uneven, not hidden behind a single locked door, perhaps, but hidden in the difficulty of language itself, where every translation is a lantern, and every lantern leaves shadows around the light. You hold a cylinder seal in your imagination, small enough to disappear inside a closed hand. It is made of stone, perhaps hematite, lapis, serpentine, limestone, or another material shaped by ancient craft. A hole runs through its centre so it could once be worn on a cord or fastened to the body of its owner. Its surface is carved with figures so fine that, at first, they seem almost impossible. Lines no wider than a breath-form robes, horns, stars, animals, thrones, vessels, weapons, trees, mountains, and hands lifted in reverence. The object itself looks quiet, but when rolled across wet clay it opens into motion. A scene appears, not all at once, but gradually, as the cylinder turns. A seated figure receives an approaching worshipper. A divine symbol hovers above. An attendant stands between worlds. A goat lifts its head near a sacred plant. A star watches from the upper field of the image. A small inscription gives a name, a title, perhaps a dedication to a god. Then the seal stops rolling, and the world it carried becomes fixed in clay. This is one of the most intimate forms of Mesopotamian art. A seal was not only decoration, it could identify a person, authorize a transaction, secure a jar, mark property, or close a tablet envelope. It was practical, legal, personal, and symbolic at the same time. In ancient Mesopotamia, where clay recorded so much of public and private life, a seal impression could function like a signature, but also like a small announcement of status and belief. The owner carried identity as an image. Authority became something you could roll into the surface of the world. You imagine the clay still damp under your thumb. The seal moves with steady pressure. Its carved body rotates. The image stretches into a procession, and for a moment, the invisible becomes administrative. Gods, symbols, and sacred animals enter the realm of contracts, storerooms, taxes, offerings, letters, and labour. Divine power is not far away. It is pressed into the practical life of the city. Museums often display cylinder seals in stillness, placed on small mounts with their modern impressions beside them. This is necessary, but it changes the experience. The ancient seal was made for touch and motion, its meaning unfolded through use. To look at it without rolling it is like looking at a closed musical instrument and trying to hear the song. The impression beside it helps, but even that impression is only one moment in a long life of repeated actions. You wonder how many such seals sit in storage, their scenes known only to catalogue records and specialists. Many seals have been studied carefully. Many others remain less famous, less displayed, less interpreted for the public. Some came from controlled excavations, where their location helps scholars understand their use. Others passed through older collections or markets, losing the soil story that once surrounded them. Without context, interpretation becomes more delicate. A scene may be beautiful, but beauty is not the same as meaning. Here, uncertainty gathers again. A seated god may be identifiable by a symbol. A sun disk may point toward a solar deity. A crescent may suggest the moon. A star may evoke Inanna or Ishtar in certain contexts. A flowing vase may belong to watery abundance or divine provision. A horned crown usually signals divinity, but the precise reading of many scenes remains debated. Is the human figure being introduced to a god, receiving authority, offering worship, or participating in a ritual moment whose words have vanished? Is the creature beside the throne mythic, symbolic, protective, or decorative? Does a star above the scene indicate a specific deity, a cosmic setting, or a sign of sacred power? The seal does not answer quickly. This slowness is important. Fringe interpretations often move faster than the clay allows. Some modern writers look at cylinder seals and see advanced devices, flying craft, star maps, genetic scenes, or records of visitors from beyond the ordinary human world. A few famous seal images have been repeatedly reimagined as evidence of hidden astronomical knowledge or ancient contact. In many cases, scholars read the same images as divine symbols, ritual scenes, or conventional motifs within Mesopotamian visual language. The difference is not merely between belief and disbelief. It is between reading an image inside its ancient symbolic system and lifting it out into a modern hunger for secrets. And yet, the hunger itself is understandable. A cylinder seal is a strange object. It hides its full image until motion releases it. It compresses a whole sacred order into a tool of daily use. It links gods to grain, rulers to clay, stars to signatures. If you wanted to imagine a forgotten system of power, you could hardly choose a more suggestive artifact. You pass your mind over one seal, showing a worshipper led by an interceding deity toward a seated god. This presentation scene became common in certain periods, especially in the early second millennium before the Common Era. It reflects a world where access mattered. One did not simply walk into divine presence alone. A lesser deity, personal god, or divine attendant could guide the worshipper. Power had layers. Approach required mediation. This detail feels deeply grounded in temple religion, but it also opens a quiet speculative door. Some have wondered whether such images preserve not only worship, but a memory of hierarchical contact between humans and higher beings. A petitioner is brought before authority. An intermediary stands between. A throne marks rank. Symbols above mark celestial association. In careful scholarship, this is religious imagery. In the fringe imagination, it becomes a diagram of ancient governance, perhaps even an echo of beings who organized human society through selected representatives. It may be only a modern dream placed over an ancient seal, but the ancient seal already dreamed in systems. You move to another impression. A hero grapples with animals. A figure stands between lions. A bullman or hybrid creature appears near a sacred tree. Such combat and mastery motifs speak to strength, protection, kingship, and mythic order. They may connect to stories only partly preserved or to visual traditions that travelled widely across regions. The debate often lies in how specific one should be. Does a scene illustrate a named myth, or does it express a general idea of power over chaos? Does a figure represent a legendary hero, a divine attendant, or a protective being? The same carved lines can support more than one cautious reading. The museum label might choose the safest path. Cylinder seal with contest scene, that phrase is accurate, but it does not tell you how alive the little object once was. It does not tell you about the hand that wore it warm against the skin. It does not tell you about the sealed jar in a storeroom smelling of dates and grain. It does not tell you about the administrator pressing it into clay while temple accounts were counted by lamplight. It does not tell you about the divine symbols quietly present in an act of record keeping, as if the gods themselves stood behind the agreement. A seal is a small door through which civilization becomes visible. Economy, religion, law, art, identity, and cosmic order all pass through it together. If museums are hiding anything about such artifacts, perhaps it is not always a fact they refuse to speak. Perhaps it is the living density of the object that no display case can fully restore. A seal behind glass cannot show the smell of wet clay, the pressure of a palm, the scratch of reeds, the murmur of scribes, the anxiety of debt, the authority of a temple, or the belief that divine order witnessed human exchange. You lower the imagined seal onto a tablet envelope. The clay receives the image. For a moment, the carved world turns into a visible line of gods, humans, animals, and signs. Then it hardens. Time passes. The building falls. The city is buried. The seal is lost, stolen, found, traded, catalogued, studied, displayed, or placed in a drawer where only a few people may see it. Yet the image remains ready. Even after 4,000 years, it waits for pressure, rotation, and a surface soft enough to remember. You sit now with a tablet that has lost its edges. It is not the neat rectangle the mind expects when it hears the word tablet. It is damaged, browned by age, broken along one side, chipped at the corners, and crossed by lines of cuneiform that begin with confidence, then vanish into fracture. The clay surface rises and dips slightly, as if the earth pressed its thumb into it during the long centuries underground. Some signs are sharp, others have softened. A few are only shadows where wedges once held meaning. You lean closer. The tablet does not give itself easily. A modern reader may imagine translation as a simple act. One language exchanged for another, one sign matched to one word. But cuneiform is more patient than that. A sign can have several values. A word can shift depending on context. A broken line can change the whole meaning of a passage. The same divine name may appear in a myth, a ritual, a god list, a royal inscription, or a school exercise, each setting shaping its force. Even when the signs are clear, the world behind them may not be. You imagine the scholar at a desk, not in a dramatic chamber, but in ordinary light, surrounded by photographs, hand copies, reference books, older publications, and perhaps other fragments from distant collections. The work is slow. One sign is checked against another. A damaged word is compared with a similar passage. A missing phrase is suggested, then questioned, then left uncertain. The record does not reward impatience. A museum display can make an ancient text seem finished. The real tablet often remains unfinished in the deepest sense. Its translation may be revised as new fragments appear. Its genre may be reconsidered. A phrase once read as myth may later be understood as ritual language. A name once restored with confidence may be reopened to debate. This is not failure. It is how ancient history breathes. The past is not a locked room suddenly opened. It is a dim landscape approached with small lamps, and every lamp reveals both ground and shadow. You look at the missing edge. There, in that absence, the imagination begins working. Perhaps the tablet once contained a divine assembly. Perhaps it named the Anunnaki in a line now broken. Perhaps it described a judgment, a creation, a descent, a flood, a city, a ritual, or a command issued by gods whose titles were familiar to the scribe but strange to you. Or perhaps it was only a record of offerings, a list of workers, a receipt for barley, with one divine name appearing because temple life required accounting as much as prayer. The uncertainty is not romantic at first. It is practical. The clay is broken, the text is incomplete. But brokenness has a way of becoming mythic. Throughout Mesopotamian studies, many famous compositions survive in multiple copies, often damaged, often separated by centuries, sometimes written by students in scribal schools. Myths such as the descent of Inanna, the flood traditions connected with Atrahasis and Utnapishtim, creation narratives, laments, hymns, and god lists have reached modern readers through reconstruction. No single perfect original stands before us. Instead, scholars compare versions, fill cautious gaps, mark uncertain restorations, and admit where the text remains unclear. This is a mainstream historical detail that feels almost poetic. Ancient memory often survives as a chorus of damaged copies, not one voice, many fragments trying to remember the same song. In that chorus, the Anunnaki appear at times as great divine powers, at times as judges, at times as part of a cosmic order difficult to translate into modern categories. One passage may place emphasis on labour among gods, another may show divine decision, another may connect divine groups with realms above or below. Their name carries weight, but the weight shifts. The curious fringe tidbit grows from this shifting weight. Some have wondered whether repeated references to divine councils and ordered groups of gods reflect more than theology. They imagine a memory of structured beings, ancient administrators, or ruling intelligences whose actions were later preserved as myth. In this reading, a broken tablet is not merely incomplete literature. It becomes a damaged report from an age no longer remembered. Such an idea can be compelling in a late-night mood, but it must remain a possibility of imagination rather than a claim of fact. The evidence does not allow such certainty. Still, it is understandable why damaged texts invite wonder. A complete sentence guides the mind. A broken sentence opens it. You trace a line where the signs continue clearly. A god speaks, a city trembles, an offering is made, a destiny is fixed, then the clay breaks. The next word is gone. The ancient scribe knew it. The first readers knew it. The temple or school that stored the tablet knew it. Only you do not know it, because time has eaten that small part of the world. And sometimes a small missing part changes everything. If the missing line held a divine name, the passage might belong to one tradition. If it held a verb of creation, it might suggest another. If it held a place name, it might anchor the story in a real city. If it held a ritual instruction, the entire scene might move from mythic storytelling into temple practice. Scholars often resist dramatic conclusions because they understand how much can turn on a broken sign. This restraint is not coldness. It is respect for the clay. You imagine tablets in different museums, separated by oceans, whose edges might once have touched the same story. One fragment in London, another in Istanbul, another in Philadelphia, another in Berlin, another in a private collection whose origin is uncertain. Some joins have been discovered after many years, when a scholar noticed the shape of a break, the handwriting of a scribe, or a sequence of signs that continued across fragments. A lost passage can wake suddenly when two broken pieces recognize each other. There is something almost tender in that. Clay remembering clay, yet many pieces may never be reunited. Excavation histories are complex. Wars, markets, early collecting, colonial systems, undocumented digging, and the sheer movement of objects have scattered ancient archives across the modern world. This dispersal creates a scholarly challenge and an ethical one. Who owns the past? Who has the right to keep it, study it, display it, interpret it, or ask for its return? Museums wrestle with such questions more openly now than they once did, but the answers remain difficult, especially for objects removed long ago under laws and habits that no longer feel innocent. So the missing edges are not only physical, they are historical, they are political, they are moral. You return to the tablet under soft light. It may contain no scandal, it may hide no forbidden secret, yet it still carries something unsettling, proof that human civilization has always depended on fragile acts of preservation. A scribe presses clay, a building stores it, a fire bakes it, a collapse buries it, a dig finds it, a museum catalogues it, a scholar reads it, a listener imagines it. At every stage, something can be lost. Perhaps that is the real hidden timeline. Not a single suppressed story, but a long sequence of partial survivals, a world of gods, kings, workers, floods, temples, songs, and fears reduced to fragments, a divine name left at the edge of a break, a possible reference to the Anunnaki preserved without enough surrounding words to know exactly how it breathed inside the sentence, a myth copied in a later age that may carry older memory, but through layers of theology, politics, and scribal tradition. You let the damaged tablet rest again. Its missing edge no longer feels empty. It feels full of everything that cannot be recovered, and everything people still try to recover. The silence around it is not proof of concealment, but it is not meaningless either. It is the silence of lost lines, lost rooms, lost voices, and lost ways of understanding the powers that ancient people believed shaped the world. And in that silence, the Anunnaki remain not as an answer, but as a question pressed into clay, broken at the edge, waiting for a reader who knows how to be patient. You enter the story through the sound of labour, not heroic labour, not the dramatic lifting of stones beneath a king's command, but the ordinary endless work of survival. Mud carried in baskets, grain ground by hand, water drawn from canals, bricks shaped under the sun, fields cleared, measured, irrigated, planted, harvested, and counted, sheep watched, wool processed, beer brewed, bread baked, temples supplied, storehouses filled and emptied, as the seasons passed over the river plain. In ancient Mesopotamia, work was not a background detail. It was the structure beneath everything. Cities depended on organized labor, and temples played a central role in gathering, storing, redistributing, and sanctifying that labor. A field was never only a field. It belonged inside a network of canals, officials, offerings, dependents, scribes, and divine ownership. Grain was food, tax, ritual provision, salary, and symbol. Clay tablets record this world with almost hypnotic repetition. Amounts, names, days, measures, deliveries, obligations. The gods, too, lived within this system. Or perhaps it is better to say that the system lived beneath the gods. You imagine the ancient temple not as a quiet church, but as a powerful household. It has lands, workers, animals, storerooms, kitchens, workshops, priests, administrators, singers, guards, and scribes. Offerings are brought not because the gods are abstract ideas, but because divine presence is treated as real and active. The god has a house. The god receives food. The god receives clothing. The god is honoured, praised, served, and maintained through ritual order. This is the grounded world behind one of Mesopotamia's strangest themes, the idea that humans were created, at least in some myths, to perform labour for the gods. You sit beside an imagined tablet in the dim light of a scribal room. The clay is dry now, but the story it carries still feels damp with the pressure of ancient hands. In the Atrahasis tradition, preserved in Akkadian, the younger gods labour, digging and maintaining the cosmic order until their burden becomes too great. They complain. A crisis unfolds. Then humanity is made to take up the work. The details vary across compositions, and the language belongs to myth, theology, an ancient reflection, not modern biology. But the idea is unmistakable. Human existence is connected to labour, service, and the relief of divine burden. The myth is unsettling because it does not begin with human dignity in the modern sense. It begins with need. You feel the old question forming in a quieter way. Why are humans here? To serve, to build, to remember, to feed the gods through offerings, to keep temples alive, to continue a system that began before them. The Mesopotamian answer is not one answer. It changes by text, city, and period. In some traditions, humanity is clay-shaped by divine intelligence. In others, Humans are part of a larger order in which gods, kings, temples, land, and labour interlock. The story does not flatter the human species, yet it does give humanity a role inside the architecture of the cosmos. Clay returns again. Humans made from clay. Tablets made from clay. Bricks made from clay. Cities made from clay. Records of human labour pressed into clay. It is as if the whole civilization is trying to say that memory and body come from the same damp earth. The creation of people from clay is not unique to Mesopotamia, but in this landscape it feels especially powerful. The river gives clay. The clay becomes brick. The brick becomes temple. The temple becomes house of the god. The god receives offerings from humans whose story also begins in clay. Some modern interpreters have taken these creation myths in a very different direction. They wonder whether references to divine shaping, mixing, or planning preserve a distorted memory of alteration, experimentation, or guidance by advanced beings. In popular Anunnaki theories, the idea that humans were created to work for the gods is sometimes read not as mythic theology, but as a veiled account of engineered servants. This interpretation is far beyond what mainstream scholarship supports. The texts are ancient religious literature, shaped by temple culture, labour systems, and theological imagination. Yet the fringe reading persists because the myth speaks with unusual directness about making humans for a purpose. That purpose, in the ancient context, is not hidden technology. It is labour beneath sacred order. Still, the ancient story is haunting enough without turning it into machinery. Imagine hearing, in a world of backbreaking agricultural work, that even the gods once grew tired. Imagine being told that human beings exist because the divine world needed relief. Such a story does not merely explain creation, it explains exhaustion. It explains why life is difficult. It explains why humans must bring offerings, maintain temples, follow rituals, and accept that the order of the world requires continuous effort. You hear baskets scraping against mud. You hear water slapping the sides of a canal. You hear a scribe reciting numbers while workers wait. The myth and the ledger begin to resemble each other. This is one of the deepest patterns in Mesopotamian civilization. The sacred and the administrative are not separate in the way a modern mind might expect. A temple account may look dry, but it records offerings to gods. A myth may look poetic, but it reflects real anxieties about labour, hierarchy, and obligation. A king may claim divine favour, but he also repairs canals, builds walls, and organises work crews. The cosmic order is always close to the practical order, and this closeness creates uncertainty. When a text says humans were made to bear the work of gods, how should you read it? As theology, a social explanation, as a poetic reflection of temple economies, as a way to justify hierarchy, as a memory of older beliefs about divine service? Scholars continue to discuss how these myths relate to lived institutions. There is no need to choose only one meaning. Ancient myths often do several kinds of work at once. You step into a courtyard where clay figurines dry in the shade. Nearby, a woman grinds grain, a boy carries water, a priest checks offerings, a scribe smooths a tablet. An old man looks toward the temple platform as smoke rises in a pale ribbon against the evening sky. No one here thinks of civilization as a museum category. Civilization is the daily negotiation between hunger and order, fear and ritual, work and divine presence. If the Anunnaki appear in this world, they appear not as decorations on the edge of thought, but as part of the question of authority itself. Who assigns work? Who receives offerings? Who decides destinies? Who stands above kings? Who judges when human noise becomes too much? In some Mesopotamian traditions, the gods grow disturbed by human clamour. In others, floods and disasters unfold within divine decision-making that feels both moral and mysterious. Such stories do not fit comfortably into modern categories. They reflect a world where humans depend on divine order but may also trouble it. The gods need humans, yet humans can become a problem. The relationship is intimate, unequal, and tense. This tension gives the myths their quiet power. You imagine a museum tablet containing only a few lines from such a story. A visitor sees ancient writing. A scholar sees a piece of a larger composition. A mystery seeker sees evidence of a hidden origin. A historian sees temple society thinking about its own burdens. Each reading touches something real in the object, but none alone holds everything. The clay remains patient beneath all of them. Perhaps humanity's role in these old stories was never meant to be comforting. Perhaps it was meant to explain why life felt so bound to work, why offerings mattered, why kings claimed divine approval, why temples stood at the center of cities, and why human beings looked upward while carrying mud in baskets. It may be that the creation myths preserve not secret engineering, but an ancient recognition that civilization itself can feel like service to powers larger than the individual. You linger at the edge of the canal as night cools the mud walls. The workers have gone home. The temple lamps burn. The stars appear slowly, reflected in dark water. Somewhere inside a storage room, grain is counted. Somewhere inside a shrine, bread is placed before a god. Somewhere inside a school, a student copies a line about the making of humans. Perhaps not fully aware that thousands of years later, someone would read it and wonder whether the beginning of humanity had been hidden in plain sight. The answer does not come, only the soft scrape of clay, the scent of smoke, and the feeling that in Mesopotamia, to be human was to be made of earth, burdened with work, and remembered by the marks left behind. You hear water before you see it. At first it is only a low sound in the dark, a movement beyond the reed beds, a restless pressure against the banks of a canal. Then it grows inside the imagination until it becomes river water, storm water, flood water. The old fear of a flat land where the difference between life and ruin may be only a raised embankment, a repaired gate, a season of careful maintenance, or a night when the rain does not stop. Mesopotamia was a world of water and uncertainty. The Tigris and Euphrates brought life, but they did not always bring it gently. Unlike the more predictable flooding of the Nile, the rivers of Mesopotamia could be violent, irregular, and difficult to control. Cities depended on canals, levees, irrigation works, and organized labor to guide water through fields. Too little water meant hunger. Too much water could erase walls, wash away grain, drown animals, and turn streets into mud. It is not surprising that flood stories took deep root in such a landscape. You stand at the edge of a city before dawn. The air is wet and cold. Reeds bend under wind. The smell of mud rises thickly from the ground. In the distance, a temple platform lifts above the lower houses, its stepped form barely visible against a grey sky. People move quickly through lanes, carrying baskets, tools, jars, bundles, frightened children. Animals pull against ropes. Someone shouts from a roof. Someone else kneels beside a doorway, trying to gather what can be saved. And somewhere, in the memory of later scribes, this fear becomes cosmic. Flood traditions appear in several Mesopotamian texts, including the Atrahasis story and the flood episode preserved in the Epic of Gilgamesh. These accounts are not identical, but they share powerful themes: divine decision, human vulnerability, a chosen survivor, a vessel, the destruction of a world, and the strange continuation of life after catastrophe. Scholars have long discussed how these flood traditions relate to local environmental experience, mythic imagination, and the broader movement of stories across the ancient Near East. The record is ancient, but it's not simple. Archaeologists have found flood deposits at some Mesopotamian sites, yet these do not point to one single universal flood covering all civilization. Rather, they suggest local or regional flooding events at different times and places. This matters. A great flood in memory does not require the whole planet to be underwater. For a city surrounded by flat land, canals, fields, and fragile mud brick houses. A devastating regional flood could become the end of the world as that community knew it. You picture water entering a room of tablets, clay records stored in baskets or on shelves, some still damp from recent writing, some dry but unbaked, some already hardened by accident or fire. Water can dissolve memory when clay has not been fired. It can smear signs, soften tablets, collapse archives, and carry away accounts of grain, hymns, debts, offerings, and names. In a land where writing itself was made from earth and water, flood could return memory to mud. This image is quiet, but it is unsettling. A civilization may disappear not only when its people die, but when its records lose shape. And here the hidden timeline begins to flicker again. The Sumerian king list places certain rulers before a great flood, then speaks of kingship descending again after the flood. In scholarly reading, this is not a straightforward historical list. It combines ideology, myth, dynastic memory, and political theology. The long reigns before the flood are usually understood as symbolic or legendary. The list may have helped later rulers imagine political authority as something ancient, divine, and transferable from city to city. Yet the structure is striking. Before the flood, after the flood, a break in the order of time. Some have wondered whether that break preserves a memory of a real cultural rupture, a disaster so important that later scribes placed it near the beginning of organised kingship. Others have taken the idea much further, imagining a lost civilization before Sumer, a world whose knowledge survived only in fragments, carried by gods, sages, or mysterious figures into the cities we can name. This belongs to the speculative edge. The evidence for a fully hidden advanced civilization before Sumer is not accepted by mainstream archaeology. Yet the possibility of older cultural memories, preserved through myth and transformed over time, remains a thoughtful question. You let the distinction rest gently. Not a vanished machine age, perhaps a remembered wound. Not proof of forbidden history, perhaps a mythic scar left by real disasters, migrations, social changes, and forgotten settlements beneath layers of silt. In this soft space between evidence and memory, the Anunnaki appear again, not necessarily as actors on a stage, but as part of the divine machinery through which catastrophe was imagined. Mesopotamian flood stories often involve assemblies or decisions among gods. Human noise, divine fatigue, mortality, survival, and offering all become part of the drama. The gods are not distant from disaster. They deliberate within it. They send it, regret it, survive it, respond to it, or gather again after it. This is not modern moral storytelling. It is older and stranger. In some versions, the gods themselves become frightened by the flood's force. In others, the survivor offers sacrifice after the waters recede, and the gods gather around the offering. To modern ears, this can sound almost contradictory. Powers great enough to destroy humanity are also dependent on human offerings. Divine authority and divine need exist together. Scholars have discussed this tension as part of the way Mesopotamian myth imagines the relationship between gods and humans. The gods rule, but the temple system also feeds them. Humans are vulnerable, but their service matters. The flood exposes the fragile bond. If humans vanish, who maintains the houses of the gods? If order is washed away, what remains of kingship? If clay records dissolve, who remembers the names? You walk through the aftermath in your mind. The water has lowered, mud clings to walls, dead reeds lie tangled against doorways. The air smells of silt, rot, wet brick, and smoke from small fires lit to dry the cold. People move through the ruins silently at first, lifting broken jars, searching for tools, gathering animals, rebuilding hearths. A temple official counts what remains. A scribe forms new clay. The first marks after disaster may be practical again. Grain, rations, labour, repair, labour. Civilization resumes as accounting. Yet beneath the accounting is grief. You think of museums now, and the flood becomes more than an ancient story. A tablet in a glass case may have survived because it was burned in a destruction layer. hardened by the very catastrophe that ended the building around it. Fire, ruin, and burial can become accidental preservation. Peaceful objects often vanish. Broken cities sometimes protect their own remains. This is one of history's quiet ironies. The past that reaches us is often the past touched by disaster. A burned archive survives, a peaceful archive decays, a shattered palace leaves a record, a vanished village leaves almost nothing. This is why the beginning of history can feel misleading. Writing begins where writing survives. Cities begin where excavations reach. Kings begin where names are preserved. But human life is older than all of this. Memory is older than clay. Fear is older than text. Before the first cities we can name, people watched rivers, stars, animals, storms, births, deaths, and fires. They told stories around embers. They buried their dead. They marked place and season. Much of that world left no museum label. Some have wondered whether the flood stories, the king lists, and the tales of divine beings preserve a faint memory of those deeper ages, not as factual reports, but as symbolic vessels carrying fragments of experiences too old for precise language. Perhaps the gods before the flood are ways of speaking about power before archives. Perhaps the long rains express distance rather than duration. Perhaps the Anunnaki and other divine assemblies became a way to imagine authority that existed before human institutions fully explained themselves. The uncertainty remains open. Scholars continue to debate the historical value of king lists, the development of flood myths, the relationship between local floods and literary tradition, and the way later scribes shaped older materials for political and theological purposes. Each answer opens another question. The clay gives enough to follow, not enough to finish. You stand again beside the dark water. The river is calm now, reflecting stars. The city breathes behind you in sleep and repair. Somewhere. A scribe writes the names of kings who ruled before the flood, perhaps knowing they belong to a different kind of time. Somewhere, a later museum will place that tradition under glass, where a visitor may read it as myth, ideology, memory, or mystery. The water moves softly against the bank. It does not reveal what it has taken. It only carries the old question onward, through reeds, mud, ruins, tablets, galleries, and dreams. You come upon an object that does not seem to know where it belongs. It is small, perhaps a tablet, a seal, a figurine, a fragment of relief, or a piece of carved stone with only part of a divine symbol remaining. It rests in a tray, clean and numbered, safe from weather, handled only by trained hands. Yet something around it feels incomplete. The museum can tell you its material: clay, limestone, gypsum, steatite, bronze. It may offer a broad date, perhaps 3rd millennium before the Common Era, perhaps Old Babylonian, perhaps Neo-Assyrian, perhaps simply Mesopotamian. It may describe the image or inscription, but when you ask where exactly it came from, the answer grows thin. This is one of the most haunting realities of ancient artifacts. Some objects survive without their homes. They may have been excavated in early campaigns, when recording standards were very different from those of today. They may have entered private collections before reaching museums. They may have passed through dealers, estates, donations, sales, or exchanges. Some were removed during periods when archaeology and empire walked too closely together. Some came from regions scarred by conflict, looting, poverty, and the long international appetite for ancient things. By the time the object reaches glass, its surface remains, but its original web of meaning has been cut. You imagine holding a broken figurine of a divine or protective being. Without context, it is difficult to know whether it stood in a temple, lay beneath a threshold, belonged to a household shrine, formed part of a foundation deposit, or came from disturbed soil long after its first placement. Each possibility changes the object's voice. In a temple, it may belong to public ritual. Beneath a floor, it may guard a private space. In a foundation, it may speak to gods and future builders. In a market without clear origin, it becomes a beautiful survivor with a wounded memory. Museums use the word provenance for this chain of ownership, origin, and movement. The word sounds calm. The issue beneath it is not calm at all. Provenance is where scholarship, ethics, law, politics, and memory meet. An object with strong archaeological context can be placed within a settlement, layer, room, burial, archive, or ritual deposit. It can speak beside pottery, bones, architecture, soil, tools, and other finds. An object without clear provenance may still be valuable, but its testimony is narrower. It can be studied for style, material, inscription, and comparison. Yet the lost context may never return. This matters especially for objects linked to gods. A divine image removed from its setting becomes easier to misunderstand. A carved figure on a seal might be read as a god when it was an attendant, or as a mythic scene when it was a generalized ritual image. A tablet mentioning offerings may seem mysterious if separated from a larger administrative archive. A fragment naming a deity may appear more extraordinary than it was within a temple's ordinary paperwork. Context is the difference between a whisper and conversation, and yet, the absence of context can make an object feel more powerful. You look at it and sense unanswered possibility. It could have come from a famous city. It could have belonged to a temple priest. It could have passed through the hands of a scribe, a merchant, a ruler, a family, a looter, a collector, a curator. It could have lain under mud brick for 4,000 years before being lifted into a world of electric light. Its missing history invites the mind to fill the dark. This is where rumours of hidden Anunnaki artifacts often attach themselves. A strange-looking figure without clear provenance becomes, in some stories, evidence of a lost divine race. A seal with celestial symbols becomes a star map. A damaged tablet with references to gods becomes a suppressed record. A figurine with large eyes becomes a memory of non-human beings. These ideas usually move beyond the evidence, yet they are fed by a genuine problem. When an object lacks its archaeological home, imagination grows faster than certainty. You walk beside shelves of displaced things. There are objects whose labels once used broad or outdated terms. There are objects acquired before modern ethical expectations became stronger. There are artifacts with old accession records written in elegant but incomplete handwriting. There are pieces identified by style because no excavation note survives. Some may have been legally acquired under the rules of their time, but still carry the discomfort of removal. Others may have more troubling histories. Museums now face increasing pressure to investigate these histories, update labels, share records, return certain objects, and acknowledge the conditions under which collections were formed. This work is slow, but necessary. It changes the atmosphere of the gallery. A museum once presented itself as a neutral guardian of world heritage. Increasingly, it must also present itself as a place that has benefited from unequal power. Ancient Mesopotamian objects did not simply float into cases. They moved through colonial interests, archaeological agreements, scholarly ambitions, market networks, war, diplomacy, and donation. To look at them fully is to look not only at Sumer or Akkad, but also at the modern world that collected them. The scholarly uncertainty here is not only what the artifact meant in antiquity, it is also what the museum means now. You pause before a label that says possibly from southern Mesopotamia. That single word, possibly, is small but honest. It opens a quiet space. The object may resemble known artifacts from temple contexts, but resemblance is not certainty. It may belong to a certain period, but dating by style has limits. It may show a divine figure, but the specific identity remains debated. It may have been part of a ritual system, but the exact practice is lost. A less careful label might sound stronger. A better label allows doubt, and doubt, when handled well, does not weaken wonder, it deepens it. You begin to understand that responsible museums are not hiding uncertainty. They are trying to make uncertainty visible without overwhelming the visitor. But there is a tension. Too much caution can make ancient objects feel lifeless. Too much certainty can mislead. Too much mystery can distort. Too little mystery can flatten the past into dates and materials. The object without an easy home sits at the centre of this tension. You imagine it in its first world. Perhaps a small seal hangs from the wrist of an administrator as he walks through a temple storehouse smelling of barley, wool, oil, and clay. Perhaps a tablet is placed on a shelf with dozens like it, recording offerings to a goddess whose name is now broken. Perhaps a foundation cone is hidden inside a wall, meant to speak to future kings, not to foreign visitors. Perhaps a figurine is buried under a doorway to protect a household from forces that modern language would call demons, spirits, or misfortune. Then time loosens everything. The roof falls. The city changes. The object sleeps. Someone finds it. Someone sells it. Someone studies it. Someone renames it. Someone places it in a drawer. Someone later wonders whether it belonged to the Anunnaki. It is possible that the most important hidden truth is not a secret identity, but a broken journey. Artifacts do not lose meaning all at once. They lose it in stages. First the ritual words vanish, then the building collapses, then the site is disturbed, then the object is removed, then the language becomes difficult, then the label becomes brief, then the visitor sees only the final, polished surface. A museum object is often the last page of a story whose first chapters are gone. You stand before that last page in silence. It may not reveal forbidden knowledge. It may not prove that ancient gods were anything other than gods in the language of ancient religion. It may not support the grand claims modern imagination has built around the Anunnaki. But it does reveal something just as important, perhaps more intimate. The past can be displaced. Meaning can be orphaned. A sacred thing can become an exhibit. A local memory can become a global curiosity. A god's object can become a catalogue number. And still, something remains, the shape of a hand, the pressure of a seal, the name of a deity, the trace of a city, the mark of a belief that once felt as real as river water and heat. You leave the object where it rests, not because its mystery is solved, but because its uncertainty has become part of its presence. It belongs to no easy story now, not fully to the museum, not fully to the lost city, not fully to scholarship, not fully to speculation. It remains suspended between them, like a piece of clay held between earth and glass, asking where human memory should live when its original home is gone. You walk now toward the temple, not the museum version of a temple, reduced to a photograph, a floor plan, a fragment of brick, or a model behind glass, but the living temple as it may have felt when the city still rose from the river plain. The path beneath your feet is packed earth. Dust gathers at the edges of your sandals. The light is late and amber, sliding across mud brick walls and catching in the smoke that drifts from small hearths. Somewhere, a goat bleats. Somewhere else, a woman shakes grain through a basket, and the dry whisper of husks moves through the air. Ahead, the temple precinct stands higher than the houses. It is not only a sacred building, it is a centre of gravity. People move around it as water moves around a stone. Workers carry baskets. Priests pass through controlled spaces. Scribes sit near shaded rooms with tablets ready. Offerings arrive from fields, workshops, herds, and households. The temple has kitchens, storerooms, courtyards, altars, administrative rooms, and restricted chambers where access is shaped by status, purity, duty, and ritual knowledge. To a modern visitor, sacred architecture may seem like a place for belief. In ancient Mesopotamia, it was also a place for order. The temple organized time through festivals. It organized labor through accounts. It organized land through ownership and redistribution. It organized fear through ritual protection. It organized kingship through divine approval. The god had a house, and that house stood at the center of a city that understood itself as living under divine attention. This does not mean every person experienced temple power in the same way. Some may have felt comfort, some may have felt obligation, some may have seen opportunity, some may have seen burden. Sacred institutions, like all institutions, carried both meaning and pressure. You approach the outer court. The walls are thick, their bricks sun-dried or kiln-fired depending on place, period, and need. Bitumen may seal certain surfaces against water. Reed mats may lie near work areas. The smell is layered: incense, sweat, wet clay, animal hide, oil, bread, wool, and the faint mineral scent of mud brick cooling after the day's heat. The temple is not silent. It hums with controlled activity, but the deeper spaces are guarded by thresholds. Thresholds matter. Mesopotamian sacred space often worked through separation. Not everyone entered everywhere. Certain rooms held divine images, ritual objects, offerings, or symbols of authority. Some objects were meant to be seen by many. Others were meant to be handled by few. Some were buried beneath floors or walls. Some were placed inside foundations, invisible from the moment construction ended. This matters when you think about museums and what they may still be hiding. Ancient temples themselves hid things first, not as conspiracies, as ritual design. A foundation deposit, for example, might include inscribed objects placed below a building or within its walls. These items could name a king, honor a god, mark construction, and speak across time to future restorers. They were hidden so memory could endure. They were concealed so the building could be anchored in sacred and political meaning. To uncover them centuries later is to interrupt a message never meant for ordinary daily eyes. You imagine a small inscribed cone being pressed into a temple wall. The king's name is there. The god's name is there. The act of building becomes eternal through clay. The object disappears into darkness, but its invisibility is part of its function. It is not lost. It is waiting inside architecture. This is a curious thought. Some of the most meaningful, ancient objects were never designed for display. Modern museums reverse that logic. They bring the hidden into light, but in doing so, they separate it from the wall, floor, doorway, or foundation that gave it power. A foundation object in a glass case can be studied, protected, and admired. Yet it no longer rests inside the sacred body of a building. Its original silence has been changed into public knowledge. The temple platform rises above you. In some Mesopotamian cities, the ziggurat formed a monumental stepped structure associated with the temple complex, lifting sacred space upward and creating a visible bond between city and sky. The exact use of ziggurats remains debated. They were not tombs like popular imagination sometimes assumes. They were connected to temples, gods, and sacred architecture. But the details of rituals performed upon or around them are not always fully recoverable. Their height suggests cosmic symbolism, but how ordinary people understood that height across different periods remains uncertain. Still, as you stand below it, you understand the emotional force. The building is a mountain made by human hands in a flat land. Its upper levels catch the last light. Birds circle near the corners. The stairs or ramps seem to lead toward a realm beyond normal reach. Whether the god is imagined above, within, or represented through the temple's sacred image, the architecture tells the body to look upward. This upward movement has fed many modern interpretations. Some fringe writers see ziggurats as landing platforms, signal towers, or technological structures connected to beings from the sky. These ideas are not supported by mainstream archaeological evidence, yet they grow from the same visual power that ancient builders may have intended. The structure feels like a meeting point between earth and heaven. Even without modern speculation, the ziggurat is already a machine of awe. It transforms mud brick into vertical longing. You enter a shaded passage. The temperature drops. The wall beside you is rough beneath the imagined touch of your hand. A lamp burns somewhere within, releasing a thin smell of oil and smoke. The space narrows, and the outside noises soften. Here, Sacred order becomes bodily, and you feel it in the controlled path, the change in light, the way sound is swallowed by walls, the sense that movement has rules. Inside such precincts, divine images may have received daily care. In Mesopotamian practice, cult statues could be treated not as mere symbols, but as presences that required clothing, washing, feeding, and ritual attention. Scholars continue to discuss how ancient communities understood the relationship between statue, deity, and presence. Was the god inside the image, represented by it, connected through ritual, or approached through it in ways that do not match modern categories? The old evidence suggests a relationship more intimate than art, but also more complex than simple literalism. You think of the Anunnaki in this setting. They are not floating above the city as a modern fantasy might picture them. They are embedded in the entire sacred order, in divine councils, in judgment, in kingship, in myths copied by scribes, in temple economies, in ritual language, in the fear that destiny could be decreed somewhere beyond human appeal. If they are hidden in the system, not merely in a single statue. A god's power is in the architecture. A city's power is in the temple. A temple's power is in the routines that make the unseen feel stable. You step into a storeroom where jars line the walls, grain, oil, dates, wool, metal tools, and ritual goods may have passed through spaces like this. A scribe records deliveries with a stylus. The tablet is small, but the system behind it is vast. The gods receive offerings, but the offerings move through human hands, human labour, human politics. Sacred power and administration meet again. This is one of the ancient world's quiet lessons. Mystery does not always live apart from bureaucracy. Sometimes it is counted, sometimes it is sealed, sometimes it is stored, sometimes it is carried in baskets beneath the eye of a god. You look toward the innermost chamber, though you do not enter. The doorway itself is enough. It suggests a limit. Beyond it may be the divine image, the focus of offerings, the place where ritual attention gathers. The restricted space reminds you that ancient religion had layers of visibility. The public saw processions, festivals, outer architecture, smoke, sound, and ritual movement. Priests and officials saw more. Certain objects may have been hidden entirely, known only through their effects. This ancient pattern of selective visibility did not vanish when objects entered museums. It changed form. Now the layers are gallery, storage, archive, conservation room, database, publication, and restricted study access. The sacred hierarchy became an institutional hierarchy. The visitor sees what is selected. The specialist sees more. The drawer holds what waits. You turn back into the fading light. The temple still stands in the mind, smelling of clay, incense, oil, and grain. It does not give up its meaning all at once. It teaches you slowly that hiddenness can be sacred, practical, protective, political, and accidental at the same time. The Anunnaki, if they belong anywhere in this story, belong within that layered order of seen and unseen power. Above the city, the first stars appear. Below them, the temple lamps begin to glow. You step out beneath the night sky, and the city seems to change its shape. By day, it is made of walls, canals, courtyards, markets, temple stairs, clay ovens, and fields beyond the gates. By night, it becomes a dark outline beneath a vast ceiling of stars. The mud brick roofs cool slowly. The reeds along the water whisper in the faint wind. Dogs move through alleys. Lamps burn in upper rooms. Above everything, the sky opens with a clarity modern eyes rarely know. Deep, black, silver, and crowded with signs. You lift your gaze. For the people of Mesopotamia, the sky was not empty distance. It was order. It was timing. It was warning. It was a great written surface, watched by specialists who believed that movements above could speak to events below. Later, Babylonian scholars became remarkably skilled observers of celestial patterns, recording eclipses, planetary motions, lunar appearances, and omens with patient attention. Their work belongs to the early history of astronomy, but it also belonged to divination, kingship, ritual, and state concern. The stars were measured, but they were also meaningful. You imagine a scholar priest standing on a roof or raised platform, wrapped against the night air, watching the moon's edge darken or the slow path of a bright planet near the horizon. He is not simply admiring beauty, he is reading consequence. The sky may speak of the king, the land, the harvest, invasion, illness, favour, danger, or imbalance. A sign in heaven may require ritual response on earth. A tablet may be written, a report may be sent. A warning may move quietly toward the palace. The old city sleeps, but not everyone sleeps. Some are watching the sky. In museum cases, this world survives in omen tablets, star lists, astrological compendia, astronomical diaries, and small objects marked with symbols of celestial powers, a crescent moon, a star, a solar disk, a divine emblem connected with a god. These signs may appear on boundary stones, seals, reliefs, and tablets. They look small under glass, but in their own world they belong to a universe where heaven and earth were joined by interpretation. This is where the Anunnaki theories often grow brighter. Many modern mystery traditions connect the Anunnaki with the heavens, imagining them as beings who came from the stars or from a distant planet. Such ideas are not part of mainstream Assyriology. In the Mesopotamian sources themselves, the Anunnaki are divine beings within ancient religious thought, not clearly described as extraterrestrial visitors in the modern sense. Yet the association persists because Mesopotamian religion did place divine power in relation to the sky, planets, stars, omens, and cosmic order. The ancient material is celestial enough to invite wonder, even if it does not support the later claims built upon it. You notice the difference. The grounded history says that Mesopotamian scholars watched the heavens carefully and folded celestial events into systems of omen interpretation. The speculative reading asks whether the sky language hides something more literal. Between them lies a softer possibility. Ancient people used the heavens as the grandest available language for power, destiny, distance, and authority. To say something came from heaven did not need to mean metal crossing space. It could mean legitimacy, divine origin, sacred order, or a force beyond human control. Still, the phrase remains powerful. From heaven, down from heaven, kingship descended from heaven. The imagination cannot help but listen. You walk through the city at night, following the scent of cooling clay and lamp smoke. A canal reflects broken stars. A narrow bridge crosses black water. Somewhere near the temple precinct, a tablet is being copied by low light. The signs speak of gods, omens, months, offerings, and celestial events. In the dimness, writing itself seems related to the stars. Both are fields of marks that require trained eyes. Both can be misread. Both hold patterns that ordinary sight may pass over. A curious fringe tidbit lingers in your mind. Some modern writers have pointed to cylinder seals and ancient star symbols as though they were diagrams of hidden planets or advanced astronomical knowledge far beyond their time. One especially famous line of speculation treats certain seal scenes as maps of a solar system. Scholars generally reject these readings, seeing instead divine symbols, stars used as sacred signs, and artistic conventions within Mesopotamian iconography. But the appeal of the fringe reading is easy to understand. A small ancient object marked with stars feels like a message. It invites the question of how much the old watchers knew, and how they framed that knowledge. The open debate among scholars is not whether Mesopotamians cared about the sky. They clearly did. The deeper questions concern development, purpose, and interpretation. How did omen traditions evolve into more mathematical astronomy? How were observations transmitted across generations? How much of a celestial record was empirical? and how much was structured by inherited divinatory assumptions? How did different communities understand the link between planets and gods? The evidence is rich, but the inner experience of those who used it remains partly out of reach. You stop beside a temple wall. Above it, a bright planet burns low and steady. To modern astronomy, it is a physical body reflecting sunlight. To the ancient observer, it may be a divine manifestation, an omen, or the visible sign of a power moving through time. Neither view cancels the emotional truth of looking up from a fragile human city and feeling watched by order. This feeling enters the objects. A boundary stone carved with celestial symbols does not merely decorate land rights. It places earthly property beneath divine witnesses. A seal bearing a star above a worship scene does not merely fill empty space. It draws the act into a cosmic field. A tablet recording an eclipse does not merely note darkness. It may signal danger to the king and demand ritual care. In such a world, the sky is not background, it is authority. You think again about museums. A tablet under glass may be labelled as an astronomical text or omen record. The label is correct, but it cannot fully reproduce the night air, the fear of a lunar eclipse, the urgency of a palace report, or the sensation that a god's will might be moving through a visible sign. In the museum, the sky becomes data. In the ancient city, data and dread were often one breath. Perhaps this is another kind of hiddenness. Not an artifact locked away, but an experience lost in translation. You can preserve the tablet. You can translate the lines. You can identify the celestial event. You can reconstruct the calendar. But can you restore what it felt like to stand under that sky, believing that the fate of a king might tremble with the moon? Can you feel how small a human body was beneath those stars, and how immense the divine order seemed? The Anunnaki, in this atmosphere, are not easy to reduce to modern categories. If they are connected in some traditions with great divine authority, judgment, or cosmic order, then the night sky becomes part of the environment in which such authority was imagined. Not necessarily their home in a literal sense, but their scale, their distance, their power to belong to a world above and below human life. You breathe in the cool air. The city has grown quiet. The last fires sink lower. The canal carries a few trembling points of light. Somewhere, a watcher records what the sky is doing. Somewhere, a later museum drawer will hold the tablet that records his words. Somewhere, a modern visitor will see the signs and wonder whether they are looking at astronomy, religion, administration, or a memory of something stranger. It may be all of these, though not in equal measure. You look up once more. The stars do not explain themselves. They shine over clay, temples as kings, workers, gods, and sleeping houses. They shine over the broken tablets and the ones not yet found. They shine over every theory humans place upon them, careful or wild, scholarly or dreamlike. They remain patient above the old land, as if waiting for each age to read them in its own language. You return to the museum, but it no longer feels like an ordinary building. The doors are tall and quiet. The entrance hall opens with polished stone, measured light, and a softness that seems designed to make footsteps slower. People lower their voices without being asked. They drift from case to case, pausing before objects that once belonged to temples, palaces, tombs, workshops, archives, and houses. No incense burns here. No offering bowls are filled. No priest speaks a ritual word. Yet the atmosphere has a kind of reverence. The museum is not a temple, and still, it borrows some of the temple's power. It arranges objects in silence. It controls light. It decides what may be approached, what must remain behind glass, what may be named, what must be generalized, what story the visitor will follow, and what remains outside the path. It turns fragments into a procession. It separates certain things from ordinary handling. It invites you to look, but not touch. It gives labels the authority of small inscriptions. It creates thresholds between public rooms, restricted archives, conservation studios, and storage spaces that only staff may enter. In this way, the modern museum becomes a house of selected memory. You walk through a gallery of ancient Mesopotamia. The walls are neutral, the cases glow, a map shows rivers, cities, and shifting kingdoms. A timeline places Sumer, Akkad, Babylonia, and Assyria in clean sequence, as though time itself could be made into a corridor. This is useful. It helps the mind settle, but the ancient world did not experience itself as a neat timeline. It was layered, contested, broken, rebuilt, translated, conquered, and remembered differently by different people. A timeline is a guide. It is also a simplification. You stop before a case containing tablets. Each one is lifted slightly on a support, its brown surface angled toward the visitor. The label speaks of writing, administration, literature, law, religion, or learning. A tablet that may once have been part of a temple economy now becomes part of an educational display. A seal once worn by a person becomes an example of artistic technique. A divine image once approached through ritual becomes a sculpture to be interpreted visually. None of this is wrong. Museums preserve and teach. Without them, many people would never encounter these objects at all. But the act of display changes the object's voice. A temple object in a temple belonged to relationship. It stood within smell, sound, offering, fear, obligation, and sacred time. A museum object belongs to interpretation. It stands within glass, lighting, scholarship, conservation, and public curiosity. The object remains itself, yet the world around it has been replaced. You feel this especially with divine objects. A horned crown under museum light signals deity. A seated figure signals authority. A ritual vessel signals offering. A guardian creature signals protection. But in the ancient setting, these were not merely signs. They were part of a living system that people trusted, feared, served, and negotiated with. The museum turns that system into knowledge. Knowledge is precious, but it is not the same as presence. This is one reason rumours of hidden artefacts persist. People sense that something has been drained from the object, and they mistake that absence for deliberate concealment. They feel that the little statue, the seal, or the tablet is more than its label, and in that feeling they are partly right. The label can tell you material, date, culture, and use. It cannot restore the low chant of ritual, the heat of a courtyard, the anxiety of a king waiting for an omen, or the private fear of a family placing a protective object beneath a threshold. The museum is honest in one way and incomplete in another. Every museum is. You move toward a larger display, perhaps a relief fragment from a later Mesopotamian palace, perhaps a lamassu, one of the colossal human-headed winged bulls or lions known from Assyrian contexts, recreated through fragments, casts, or surviving originals in world museums. These beings are not Anunnaki, and careful interpretation must keep such categories distinct. They served protective and royal functions in Assyrian monumental art, guarding gateways and expressing power. Yet to the modern eye they often merge into a general field of ancient mystery, hybrid guardians, divine kingship, celestial strength, beings between human and animal. This blending is common. It is also dangerous if left unchecked. The ancient Near East contained many different peoples, periods, languages, artistic traditions, and divine systems. Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian materials are related but not identical. A modern mystery story can too easily smooth them into one shadowy civilization of gods and hidden knowledge. Scholarship resists this smoothing because differences matter. A deity's role in one period may not match another. A symbol can change. A protective spirit is not necessarily a god. A royal image is not necessarily a mythic record. Still, the blending happens because museums place objects near one another, often in compressed rooms. Sentries sit in neighbouring cases. A visitor may pass from a Sumerian votive figure to an Akkadian seal, to a Babylonian tablet, to an Assyrian relief in minutes. The mind stitches them together. It creates a continuous ancient dream. The museum tries to organise. The imagination tries to connect. Some have wondered whether museums understand more than they say, whether curators quietly know that certain patterns point to a hidden Anunnaki presence across many artefacts. A more grounded answer is that curators often know more uncertainty than labels can hold. They know how fragile identifications can be, how much is debated, how many objects lack full context, and how easily public storytelling can distort nuance. What may feel like withholding is sometimes caution. What may feel like concealment is sometimes the refusal to turn ambiguity into spectacle. Yet the museum has its own power to shape belief. By choosing which objects stand in the main gallery, it suggests what matters. By placing one tablet under glass and another in storage, it creates visibility and invisibility. By using certain words on a label, it guides interpretation. By leaving out older disputes, it creates calm. By including uncertainty, it invites deeper thought. Every display is an argument, even when it speaks softly. You notice the lighting now. A tablet is illuminated from above, making the wedge marks cast tiny shadows. The object becomes legible and beautiful. Nearby, a seal impression is enlarged so the scene can be read. A small statue is placed at eye level, allowing its gaze to meet yours. These choices are modern. They are designed. They create emotional contact. The museum does not merely preserve the past. It stages an encounter with the past. In that staging, it becomes a modern temple of memory. Not because it worships the old gods, but because it asks you to enter quietly, submit to arranged space, receive authorized stories, and leave carrying a feeling that something older than you has spoken. The gods are no longer fed. The lamps are electric. The offerings are attention, funding, scholarship, and public trust. You think of the Anunnaki again, not as figures hiding behind a curtain, but as a name moving through systems of authority. In the ancient city, divine authority passed through temples, rituals, kings, scribes, and images. In the modern world, ancient authority passes through museums, universities, translations, archives, documentaries, and search results. The name changes houses, but it still depends on institutions to survive. This raises an open question that scholars, curators, and communities continue to face. Who has the right to frame ancient memory? The country where the artifact was found? The museum that conserved it? The scholars who can read it? The descendants of the region's people? The global public? The question has no easy answer, and it grows heavier when objects were removed under unequal conditions. You stand in the gallery as closing time approaches. A guard's footsteps pass softly. Visitors drift toward the exit. The cases remain lit for a few moments longer, like small islands in a darkening room. The artifacts do not return to their temples, archives, or storerooms of origin. They remain in this modern house of memory, safe and displaced, visible and incomplete. The museum has not lied to you, but it has not told you everything either. No museum can. As the lights dim, the glass reflects your face over the clay tablets, making your own eyes hover among the ancient signs. For a moment, you become part of the display, another brief witness in a chain of watchers stretching from scribes and priests to excavators, curators, visitors, and dreamers. The room grows still. The objects wait for morning. You hear the rumour before you see the object. It moves softly through books, late-night documentaries, online forums, private conversations, and the darker corners of museum imagination. Somewhere, people say, there are artifacts not shown to the public. Somewhere, a tablet names what scholars refuse to discuss. Somewhere, a sealed drawer holds an object that would change the story of human origins. somewhere beneath the calm surface of world museums. The Anunnaki wait behind a label that has been deliberately softened. The rumour has a shape but not a location. That is part of its power. A real artifact has weight, material, damage, measurements, provenance, and a record, even when that record is incomplete. A rumour can move without any of these. It does not need clay dust under its edges or a catalogue number on a card. It only needs uncertainty. It feeds on missing translations, private collections, old excavation records, closed storerooms, and the simple truth that most museum objects are not on display at any given time. You stand in a quiet archive room, where the air is cool and the lights are low enough to protect fragile things. Boxes sit on shelves, files rest in cabinets, old photographs show excavation trenches, workers, walls, tablets, broken statues, and piles of pottery. A researcher turns pages carefully. A pencil moves across paper. Nothing here looks like the centre of a forbidden history. Yet this is where real hiddenness often lives. In paperwork, in old handwriting, in uncertain site notes, in a photograph without a clear caption, in an object acquired long ago under conditions that no one fully recorded. The idea of forbidden objects is tempting because it gives uncertainty a villain. If something is unknown, someone must be hiding it. If a text is untranslated, someone must be suppressing it. If an artifact is strange, someone must have decided the public was not ready. But the older you grow in the company of ancient things, the more you sense that the truth may be less dramatic and more haunting. Much of the past is hidden because time is powerful, records are fragile, and human institutions are imperfect. Museums do have closed spaces. They have to. They store fragile objects away from light. They restrict access to prevent damage. They hold items that require conservation. They protect collections from theft. They manage research requests. They follow legal and ethical obligations. They may also possess objects whose ownership history is uncertain, whose display could be culturally sensitive, or whose interpretation is still under debate. These are real reasons for limited access. They do not require a secret council whispering over Anunnaki relics, and yet limited access can feel like secrecy. A visitor sees 10 tablets in a gallery, then learns that thousands more exist in storage. The mind naturally asks what lies beyond sight. A small fraction becomes a symbol of a larger unseen world. This is not foolish. It is human. The visible world has always taught us to imagine the hidden one. You open, in your mind, a file related to a Mesopotamian artifact acquired in the early 20th century. The file might contain a dealer's note, a letter from a collector, a purchase record, a broad regional attribution, and perhaps a later scholarly correction. The object may be real and valuable, but its first resting place in the earth is unknown. Was it from Nippur, Kish, Lagash, a smaller site whose name is lost? Was it excavated carefully, found accidentally, or removed through looting? Each unanswered question loosens the object from its history. This is the true problem behind many supposed forbidden objects. Not that they reveal too much, that they reveal too little. A tablet without context may mention a divine name, but not the ritual system around it. A figurine may appear unusual, but without its placement, it is harder to know whether it guarded a door, served a household rite, belonged to a temple, or had some other function. A seal may show celestial symbols, but without date and origin, its scene floats among possible meanings. A fragment with the word Anunnaki may sound extraordinary to modern ears, while in its ancient setting it may have been part of a known theological pattern, a list, a myth, or a ritual phrase. Still, some objects remain genuinely curious. There are artifacts whose imagery resists easy explanation. There are divine scenes without secure identification. There are hybrid beings that unsettle modern categories. There are god lists with complex arrangements. There are damaged myths with missing endings. There are temple texts that preserve ritual details but not the full belief behind them. There are private collections where objects remain difficult for scholars to access. There are old publication gaps, unpublished tablets, and pieces known to specialists but invisible to the public eye. This is not nothing. It is simply not the same as proof of a hidden Anunnaki revelation. The curious fringe tidbit here is that some private collectors and older archives have indeed held important ancient objects outside wide public view for long periods. Sometimes scholars only learn of a tablet when it appears in a sale, an estate, a donation, or a catalogue. Sometimes an object has been sitting quietly for decades before someone realizes its text is unusual. Such moments can feel like hidden history surfacing, but when they occur, they usually expand known patterns rather than overturn the entire human story in one stroke. A newly recognized fragment might add lines to a myth. It might clarify a name. It might change a translation. It might connect two broken pieces. That is already extraordinary. You do not need a golden machine in a sealed vault for the past to surprise you. You imagine a tablet placed on a foam support beneath a lamp. Its signs are shallow, a few lines named gods. One line may refer to a group of divine beings. Another line is broken. A scholar hesitates over a restoration. If the missing word is one thing, the text belongs to a familiar ritual. If it is another, the passage may carry a rarer theological phrase. A public headline would want certainty. A responsible publication would use caution. The record is fragmentary. The reading is possible. The conclusion must remain open. This is the kind of uncertainty that rarely becomes popular. It is too slow. It does not explode the timeline. It adjusts it. It does not reveal a hidden race. It refines a divine title. It does not prove that museums are lying. It shows that ancient evidence grows by increments, by patient corrections, by one broken line placed carefully beside another. And yet, if you are listening in the dark, even an incremental change can feel like a door opening. A forgotten line of text may restore a divine relationship no one had seen clearly. A seal impression may show a local variation of a deity's symbol. A mislabeled object may belong to a different period than first thought. A tablet once treated as administrative may contain a ritual formula. A collection once considered ordinary may hold a rare copy of a myth. In these cases, the hidden world is real, but it is not hidden because it is forbidden. It is hidden because scholarship is a slow lantern. The open debate remains. How many important Mesopotamian texts are still unpublished or poorly understood? How many artifacts in older collections lack enough provenance to be interpreted fully? How should museums balance public access with preservation? How should objects acquired under colonial conditions be handled today? How should scholars speak about uncertain divine imagery without encouraging fantasy or stripping away wonder? These questions are active, unresolved, and deeply human. You sit with them. The rumour of forbidden Anunnaki artifacts begins to soften. It becomes less like a locked vault and more like a foggy landscape. In that fog are real things. Storage rooms, unpublished fragments, uncertain labels, missing contexts, private collections, damaged records, ethical tensions, and the difficulty of translating ancient divine language. Also in that fog are projections, exaggerations, misunderstandings, and stories that move faster than evidence. Both are present. The task is not to kill the mystery. The task is to make it honest. You pass a final row of drawers in the archive. Each drawer has a number. Behind each number may be a fragment of someone's world, a line of a hymn, a record of sheep, a dedication to a god, a seal of an official, a broken image of a winged guardian, a small clay object buried for protection, a name that once carried fear and reverence through a temple courtyard. Most drawers contain no secret that would shake civilization, but every drawer contains a reminder that civilization is never fully seen. Somewhere, perhaps, an object waits for the right reader. Not a forbidden artifact in the loud sense, but a patient one. A fragment that may change a footnote, restore a title, alter a date, or make a familiar god seem slightly stranger than before. It may mention the Anunnaki, it may not. It may only show that the ancient world had more rooms than our current map can hold. The archive grows quiet around you. The rumour does not vanish. It simply becomes older, calmer, more textured, less a cry of conspiracy, more a whisper from unfinished work. The museum may be hiding nothing on purpose. It may be hiding everything by limitation. Its drawers are not portals to certainty. They are thresholds to patience. And behind those thresholds, the ancient objects continue their long sleep, waiting not to be exposed, but to be understood. You kneel now at the edge of an excavation trench. The sun is low, but the ground still holds the heat of the day. Dust clings to the skin. The air smells of dry earth, sweat, straw, and distant cooking fires. Around you, the ancient city is not yet a city in the visible sense. It is a rise in the landscape, a mound shaped by centuries of collapsed mud brick, broken pottery, buried walls, ash layers, floors, drains, graves, and the slow accumulation of lives built one over another. Archaeologists call such a mound a tell. To the untrained eye, it may look like a hill. To someone who has learned to read soil, it is a book written in layers. You watch workers move carefully across the trench. Some use picks and baskets. Others brush around exposed brickwork. A pottery specialist studies sherds. A photographer records a wall before it is removed. A notebook fills with measurements, sketches, soil descriptions, object numbers, and cautious interpretations. The work is physical, repetitive, and easily romanticized from far away. In reality, it is hot, slow, dusty, and full of decisions that cannot always be undone. Every scrape matters. If a tablet is found in a sealed room, its meaning expands. If the same tablet is found in disturbed soil, its meaning changes. If a seal appears beside administrative tablets, it speaks one way. If it appears in a grave, it speaks another. If a figurine is found under a threshold, its protective role becomes more likely. If it arrives later through an art dealer with no site record, the object keeps its body but loses part of its voice. This is why the hands that dug ancient objects from the earth matter so much. Not only the famous archaeologists whose names appear in books, but the local labourers who recognised changes in soil, carried baskets, uncovered walls, lifted tablets, and learned through experience where ancient surfaces might be hiding. For much of the history of archaeology in the Middle East, these workers were essential and often undercredited. The published report might name a European or American director, while the daily knowledge of local diggers remained almost invisible. Modern archaeology has become more aware of this imbalance. But the old records still carry the silence. You imagine a worker's hand pausing over a small tablet emerging from the dirt. The clay is fragile. The signs are clogged with soil. It may be a receipt, a school exercise, a legal text, or a line from a myth. At that moment, before it is cleaned, numbered, photographed, translated, packed, shipped, stored, published, or displayed, it is simply a small thing returning from the ground. The person who first sees it may not know whether it will become famous or forgotten. The trench does not announce importance. Importance is often assigned later. This assignment can be fair, careful, and scholarly. It can also be shaped by the desires of the age that receives the object. Early excavators often sought monumental architecture, royal inscriptions, spectacular statues, museum-worthy treasures, and texts that could illuminate the ancient Near East in ways exciting to their sponsors. Ordinary objects were sometimes less valued, though they may now be seen as crucial for understanding daily life. A clay accounting tablet may reveal more about ancient society than a beautiful but contextless sculpture. A trash pit may speak more honestly than a palace wall. The past does not always place its truth in the most impressive objects. You walk through a field camp at night. Lamps glow in tents. Boxes sit in rows. Newly found objects are wrapped, labelled, and discussed. There is fatigue in the air, but also anticipation. Tomorrow may reveal a wall, a drain, a burial, a tablet archive, a seal impression, or nothing but more broken brick. Archaeology requires patience with disappointment. It also requires humility, because each trench exposes only a narrow cut through a much larger vanished world. Here, the fringe imagination often pauses over the idea of hidden discoveries at excavation sites. Some stories claim that strange artifacts were found and removed quietly, that tablets describing the Anunnaki in startling detail were hidden before publication, or that objects too disruptive for accepted history disappeared into museum basements. These stories are difficult to verify and often grow without evidence, yet they feed on real historical issues: incomplete publication, colonial control of finds, uneven access to archives, wartime losses, looting, and the fact that many excavation records remain scattered or difficult to consult. The soil itself is not the only thing broken. The history of discovery is broken too. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeology often operated within imperial systems. Excavated objects were divided between local authorities and foreign institutions under agreements that reflected the politics of their time. Some artifacts travelled to London, Paris, Berlin, Philadelphia, Istanbul, Chicago, or other centres of study and display. Some remained in regional museums. Some disappeared into private hands. Some were destroyed by poor handling, conflict, erosion, or neglect. The result is a world archive spread across many countries, languages, laws, and memories. This scattered archive makes scholarship possible and difficult at the same time. A tablet in one museum may belong to an archive whose other pieces are elsewhere. A seal impression found in one season may only make sense when compared with an object excavated decades earlier. A god list may be published in one language, corrected by another scholar, then re-examined after a new fragment appears. Knowledge grows through connection, but the pieces are often far apart. You think again of the Anunnaki, if the ancient evidence for them is scattered through tablets, myths, god lists, ritual texts, and images of divine order, then their modern reconstruction depends on the path those objects took after discovery. Which tablets were found, which were preserved, which were published, which were destroyed, which were bought without context, which remain in drawers because no specialist has yet studied them. The modern image of the Anunnaki is not only ancient, it is also shaped by excavation history. That thought feels important. The gods that survive in modern imagination are partly chosen by accident. A fire bakes one archive, water destroys another. A worker notices one tablet, another shatters unnoticed. A museum funds one study, another collection waits. A scholar learns one language, another text remains obscure. A popular writer selects one phrase and ignores the rest. Slowly, a divine name becomes famous, not only because of its ancient meaning, but because of modern pathways of survival and attention. You stand beside the trench wall. Layers of soil run like muted bands through the earth. Ash, brick fall, floor, fill, sand, another floor, another collapse. This vertical record is a quiet correction to every simple theory. Civilizations are not single events. They are accumulations. A city is built, repaired, burned, flooded, rebuilt, abandoned, reused, forgotten, excavated, interpreted, displayed. Every layer changes what lies beneath it. The scholarly uncertainty here is deep and practical. How much of ancient Mesopotamian religion can be reconstructed from elite texts and temple objects? How much did ordinary people believe differently from scribes and priests? How much of what we call Sumerian tradition was already reshaped by later Akkadian, Babylonian, or Assyrian scribes? Excavation gives objects, but it does not give direct access to private thought. The trench exposes walls. not dreams. Still, it offers traces: a household shrine, a child's burial, a seal worn smooth, a tablet with a student's awkward signs, a kitchen floor blackened by repeated fires, a foundation deposit hidden with care, a figurine placed where fear might enter. These traces remind you that ancient religion was not only grand mythology, it lived in bodies, homes, hunger, danger, childbirth, illness, work, and the need to feel protected. The Anunnaki may appear in great divine structures, but the world that remembered them was made by human hands carrying water, cutting reeds, shaping bricks, and pressing names into clay. You look at the workers again. Without them, the museum case would be empty. Without their labour, the tablet would still sleep in the mound. Without the recorder, the context might vanish. Without the conservator, the clay might crumble. Without the translator, the signs would remain silent. Without the visitor, the object might never become part of a living question. History is not recovered by one heroic figure. It is carried by many hands. Some hands are named, many are not. As night settles over the excavation, the trench becomes a shadow. The exposed wall cools. Tools are stacked. The day's finds rest in labelled trays. Above the mound, the stars appear as they once appeared over the living city, indifferent and familiar. Somewhere beneath the unexcavated earth, more tablets may remain. Some may mention gods. Some may list grain. Some may hold only a name. Some may change a small corner of scholarship. Some may never be found. You leave the trench with dust on your clothes and a quieter understanding of hidden artifacts. They are not always hidden by museums. Some are hidden by soil, some by history, some by old systems of power, some by missing records, some by the forgotten hands that first brought them into light, and perhaps the most fragile hidden thing is not the artifact itself, but the story of how it was found, who touched it, who named it, who moved it, and who was left out when the world began to call it ancient history. You meet the Anunnaki now in a different place, not on a tablet beneath museum glass, not in the dim language of a temple hymn, not in a list of gods copied by a tired student in a scribal school. You meet them in the modern imagination, where ancient names drift into books, films, interviews, online arguments, dreamlike artwork, and whispered questions asked long after midnight. The name has travelled far. Once, it belonged to the religious world of Mesopotamia, where divine beings were arranged through stories, rituals, city traditions, and shifting theological systems. Today, the same name can appear beside lost civilizations, hidden planets, forbidden museums, ancient astronauts, secret bloodlines, unexplained monuments, and theories of human creation. It has become more than a term from cuneiform texts. It has become a screen onto which modern people project wonder, fear, suspicion, longing, suspicion, and the feeling that official history may be too small. You sit in the quiet glow of a computer screen, the room dark around you. Outside, the modern city hums with traffic, wires, aircraft, advertisements, and digital signals. On the screen, ancient statues stare from thumbnail images. Clay tablets are enlarged until their wedge marks look like codes. Cylinder seals are circled in red. A narrator asks whether museums are hiding evidence. A comment section fills with certainty, doubt, excitement, anger, and strange tenderness. The ancient world has become modern dream material. This does not mean the dream is true, but it does mean the dream deserves to be understood. The mainstream historical view remains clear and careful. The Anunnaki are divine beings within Mesopotamian religion. Their functions vary across texts and periods. They are not described in ancient sources in the direct modern language of alien visitors. The surviving material belongs to myth, ritual, theology, kingship, divine hierarchy, and ancient attempts to understand order, suffering, labour, death, and authority. Scholars read them through language, context, comparison, and the long history of Mesopotamian belief. Yet the popular Anunnaki story moves differently. It asks why human creation myths speak of divine planning. It asks why kingship descends from heaven. It asks why gods gather in councils, assign destinies, demand labour, and interact with chosen humans. It asks why some figures in ancient art appear strange to modern eyes. It asks why museums store so many objects out of sight. It asks why so many ancient cultures speak of beings from above, teachers from elsewhere, or ages of greater knowledge lost in catastrophe. These questions are not all equal. Some are grounded in real ancient texts. Some are shaped by misunderstanding. Some are built from selective reading. Some are emotional rather than evidential. But together, they reveal a modern hunger. The desire for human history to be deeper, stranger, and less settled than the classroom version many people remember. You understand the appeal. A museum label can feel final. A school timeline can feel too clean. A textbook may pass over the emotional strangeness of ancient religion in a few paragraphs. But when you actually sit with Mesopotamian material, the world is already extraordinary. Cities rising from mud, writing pressed into clay, temples feeding gods, kings claiming heaven's favour, flood stories dividing time, divine councils fixing fate, humans made for labour, statues treated as living presences after ritual care, stars read as messages. The real ancient world does not need to be made artificial in order to be astonishing. Still, modern mystery culture often tries to make it literal in a different way. It turns gods into visitors, myths into reports, symbols into diagrams, ritual language into hidden science, museum storage into suppression. This is where caution becomes important, not to drain wonder, but to protect it from becoming too easy. If every winged figure becomes an alien, then ancient art loses its own language. If every divine council becomes a command centre, then Mesopotamian theology is flattened into modern machinery. If every missing tablet becomes proof of concealment, then the real labour of archaeology is ignored. The mystery becomes louder, but also thinner. A quieter mystery is harder to hold. It allows the Anunnaki to remain ancient. It allows them to belong to a world where divinity was not a costume for technology, but a way of organising existence. It allows the gods to be strange on their own terms. It allows the ancient human imagination to be powerful, complex, and disciplined, rather than merely confused about machines from the sky. And yet, it may also be too simple to dismiss modern fascination as foolish. People turn to the Anunnaki because something about the surviving record feels unfinished. The oldest cities we can name are not the beginning of human experience. Writing begins late in the long story of our species. Archaeology has revised timelines many times. Sites once unknown become central. Technologies appear earlier than expected. Trade networks stretch farther than assumed. Myths sometimes preserve distant memories of real landscapes, disasters, or social changes. Though not always in direct form, history does change, not usually through one forbidden object, more often through slow accumulation, a new excavation, a better date, a revised translation, a forgotten archive, a satellite image, a re-evaluation of old finds, a local scholar asking a question that earlier researchers ignored. These changes do not require a hidden Anunnaki vault, but they do remind you that human history is not finished. The past remains active beneath the surface of the present. The open debate, then, is not whether every modern theory is valid. Many are not well supported. The deeper debate is how to handle ancient mystery without either exploiting it or suffocating it. How do you speak of divine beings in a way that honours their religious context, while also admitting that ancient texts contain unresolved questions? How do museums make storage, uncertainty, and provenance visible without feeding false claims? How do storytellers invite wonder without pretending that speculation is evidence? You sit with that question for a while. The Anunnaki in modern imagination are partly ancient, partly modern. They are names from clay, but also mirrors held up to contemporary anxieties. People who distrust institutions see hidden archives. People who feel history is incomplete see suppressed origins. People who feel spiritually displaced see forgotten creators. People fascinated by technology see advanced beings. People drawn to mystery see a door left open in the oldest writing. Perhaps the modern Anunnaki are not only about Sumer, perhaps they are also about us. About the fear that we do not know where we came from. About the hope that someone once knew more. About the suspicion that power always hides its own beginning. About the loneliness of living in a modern world full of information but hungry for meaning. This does not prove the theories, or it explains their emotional survival. You return in thought to a small tablet, brown and cracked, resting in a drawer. It says what it says, no more and no less. Around it, centuries of interpretation gather like dust in lamplight. A scholar reads grammar, a museum records accession history. A visitor senses mystery, a theorist sees evidence, a storyteller hears an echo, the object remains patient beneath all of them. It may be that the Anunnaki have endured because they stand at a crossing point, between heaven and earth, between myth and administration, between temple and archive, between ancient authority and modern doubt, between the known and the imagined. You do not have to choose the loudest interpretation to feel the depth of that crossing. You only have to listen slowly. The name itself has become like a seal rolled across many ages, leaving a different impression on every surface it touches. On clay, it belonged to divine order. In scholarship, it becomes a problem of translation and context. In popular culture, it becomes a mystery of origins. In your own mind, late at night, it becomes a question without a final shape. The screen grows dim. The museum lights are far away now. The ancient city is farther still, yet the name remains, crossing from tablet to book to whisper, carrying both genuine antiquity and modern invention. It is not a clean survival, it is a layered one, like a mound built from many occupations of the same ground. And somewhere inside that layered name, the real mystery continues, not as a shout from forbidden history, but as a quiet reminder that the past is never only what happened, it is also what later ages need it to mean. You sit at a long table covered with fragments. Not all of them are physical. Some are clay tablets with broken corners. Some are photographs of seals. Some are museum labels copied into a notebook. Some are excavation plans. Some are translated lines from myths. Some are names from god lists. Some are memories of statues with wide eyes, temple cones hidden inside walls, astronomical tablets, damaged flood stories, and objects with no easy home. At first, the table looks chaotic. Then, slowly, your mind begins to arrange it. This is how the ancient world often returns, not as one complete machine lifted whole from the ground, but as scattered parts whose original connections must be tested with care. A king list beside a flood story, a creation myth beside an administrative tablet, a cylinder seal beside a temple plan, a divine name beside a ritual object, a votive statue beside an excavation note, a star symbol beside an omen text. Each piece is real, but the pattern between pieces must be rebuilt gently. You cannot force them. If you press too hard, the pieces break again. You begin with the most grounded pattern. Mesopotamian civilization was deeply organized. Cities depended on canals, labor systems, temple households, scribes, kings, officials, merchants, farmers, herders, craftspeople, and rituals that tied human activity to divine authority. Writing helped manage this complexity. Temples and palaces produced records. Myths explained origins, obligations, suffering, order, and the relationships between gods and humans. Art gave visible form to power. Seals carried identity and authorization. Architecture shaped movement through sacred and political space. This alone is a remarkable machine. A human machine of clay, water, labor, belief, and memory. Then you notice another pattern. Hierarchy. Gods above humans, greater gods above lesser gods, kings beneath gods, but above ordinary people, priests, scribes, workers, dependents, captives, families, and strangers, each placed differently within the order. Even the divine world often appears structured, with assemblies, decisions, decrees, messengers, attendants, and realms. The ancient city seems to imagine the universe through the language of administration, and administration through the language of the divine. This does not mean the gods were merely politics in disguise. It means politics, religion, and cosmic order spoke to one another. The Anunnaki belong somewhere inside this pattern, though not in a single simple place. They are not always the centre of every text. They are not always clearly depicted in art. Their role shifts across traditions, but they appear as part of a larger divine order, sometimes great, sometimes remote, sometimes associated with judgment, sometimes connected to the underworld or to the assembly of powers. They are less like one statue on the table and more like a line running through several fragments. You mark that line carefully. The temptation is to turn the line into a highway, then into a hidden map, then into a completed theory. That is what many modern mystery readings do. They gather every strange image, every celestial sign, every flood story, every long reign, every divine council, every creation myth, and every unopened museum drawer into one grand system. The result can be thrilling, but it often becomes too smooth. It removes the rough edges that make the evidence honest. The ancient record is not smooth. It is cracked. It disagrees with itself. It changes over time. It was copied, adapted, translated, damaged, buried, excavated, moved, catalogued, and reinterpreted. A responsible reconstruction must leave some spaces empty. You pick up one fragment of the larger machine, the creation of humans from clay and divine intention. It may suggest that ancient Mesopotamians understood humanity as made for service within a divine order. It also reflects real temple economies, where offerings and labour sustained the houses of the gods. Modern fringe interpretations sometimes read this as a memory of engineered workers created by advanced beings. That reading is imaginative, but it stretches the texts beyond what they can securely bear. The grounded reading is already profound. Humans are not placed at the centre as masters. They are placed in relation to powers, burdens, and obligations. You pick up another fragment, kingship descending from heaven. In its ancient context, this phrase can be read as a statement about legitimacy, cosmic order, and the sacred origin of rule. It explains why cities and rulers belong to a divine framework. Some modern readers hear it as literal descent from the sky. The phrase allows wonder, but scholarship asks you to remember the language of ancient political theology. Heaven is not always location in the modern physical sense. It is authority, origin, distance, and sanctity. Another fragment, flood memory. The ancient stories preserve catastrophe, divine decision, survival, and renewal. Archaeology supports the reality of serious floods in Mesopotamian landscapes, though not one single global event in the simple way popular retelling sometimes imagine. The mystery lies in how local disaster becomes cosmic story, and how a community's end of the world becomes a literary beginning for later generations. Another fragment, museum storage. There are indeed many objects unseen by the public, many unpublished texts, many uncertain labels, and many items with incomplete provenance. This creates real gaps in knowledge. But gaps are not automatic proof of suppression. Sometimes they are evidence of scale, damage, funding limits, legal complexity, and the slow pace of expertise. You place the fragments beside one another. The machine begins to take shape, but not as a device of metal or hidden technology. It resembles a memory system, a civilization made ways to preserve authority, interpret disaster, communicate with gods, organize labor, and carry names across time. Temples were engines of order, tablets were containers of memory, seals were instruments of identity, myths were frameworks for meaning. Museums became later chambers where fragments of this system were stored after the world that made them had vanished. This is a less spectacular reconstruction than a forbidden Anunnaki machine. It is also more durable, yet the unusual possibilities do not disappear entirely. It is possible that some myths preserve older memories in distorted form. It is possible that divine genealogies encode political changes or forgotten cultural encounters. It is possible that certain symbols once carried meanings now lost beyond recovery. It is possible that unpublished tablets may refine our understanding of the Anunnaki, or reveal local traditions that complicate current models. It is possible that an object sitting quietly in storage could change a small but meaningful part of the story. Small changes matter. A footnote can become a doorway. A corrected reading can shift a god's role. A newly joined fragment can restore a scene once thought lost. This is where patient mystery lives. You look at the table again. The fragments no longer seem random, but they also do not form a finished picture. The system you are rebuilding has missing gears. Some are lost forever. Some may remain buried beneath mounds. Some may sit in drawers, mislabeled or waiting. Some may exist only as copies of copies, preserved in later texts that changed older traditions. Some may have dissolved in water before anyone could read them. The open scholarly uncertainty here is vast. How much of Mesopotamian religion can be reconstructed from elite written sources? What did ordinary worshippers believe about divine groups like the Anunnaki? How did local traditions differ from the standardized versions copied in scribble schools? How much did later theological systems reshape older Sumerian material? Which images truly correspond to which texts? These questions do not destroy the story. They keep it alive. You begin to understand that the broken machine of memory cannot be rebuilt into certainty. It can only be made to move a little. When it moves, you glimpse cycles, creation and labour, order and noise, flood and survival, kingship and collapse, temple construction and ruin, burial and excavation, display and storage, scholarship and speculation. Each cycle turns slowly, and each one carries the same quiet warning. Human beings create systems to hold meaning, but time breaks every system and leaves later ages to guess at the design. The Anunnaki remain within that turning. They may not be the engineers of a hidden machine, as some imagine. They may be one of the names preserved inside the machine itself, part of the divine language through which Mesopotamians explained power, judgment, creation, hierarchy, and the uneasy bond between human labour and sacred order. Their mystery is not reduced by grounding them in history. It becomes older, heavier, and less easily consumed. You place the last fragment down. It is only a small piece of clay with a few signs. Perhaps it once named a god. Perhaps it once counted sheep for a temple. Perhaps it once belonged to a school exercise where a student learned words older than his own understanding. You cannot know everything, but you can feel the shape of the larger silence around it. The table grows dim. The fragments wait without impatience. You have not solved them, but you have learned to handle them more gently. That may be the closest one can come to certain kinds of ancient truth. Not possession, not revelation, not a final answer, but the willingness to sit among broken pieces and let their incompleteness remain part of what they mean. You come at last to the oldest question inside the clay. Not where the gods lived, not what museums keep behind their quiet doors, not whether a broken seal shows a throne, a star, a king, or a being whose name has shifted across centuries. The question is smaller and larger than all of that. What was humanity meant to be? You stand again in the river plain, where the ground is dark near the canals and pale where the sun has dried it hard. Morning comes slowly over the reeds. A thin mist lifts from the water. Somewhere, a woman kneads dough beside a low oven. A man leads cattle toward a field. A child watches a scribe press signs into clay, not yet understanding that those marks can make a voice survive longer than a body. The city wakes in layers. Animals first, then workers, then officials, then temple bells, then the murmur of trade and obligation. No one here has the luxury of being only symbolic. Life is work, and yet life is also watched by gods. In Mesopotamian thought, Humans were often imagined in relation to divine need, divine order, and divine authority. Myths could describe people as formed from clay, shaped through the wisdom or decision of gods, and placed into a world where service, offerings, labour, and ritual attention mattered deeply. This does not mean every ancient person explained existence in exactly the same way, but it does reveal a powerful pattern. Humanity was not imagined as standing alone. To be human was to be woven into a system that reached from soil to temple, from temple to heaven, from heaven to the hidden places where destinies were fixed. You walk through a field where irrigation channels divide the land like thin lines cut into the earth. Water moves where hands have guided it. Without labour, the field dries. Without canals, grain fails. Without grain, the city weakens. Without offerings, the temple order trembles. The ancient imagination could look at this chain and see not merely economics, but cosmic responsibility. Human beings kept the world going, not by ruling it absolutely, but by serving within it. This is humbling. It is also unsettling. Modern people often want origin stories that make humanity special in a triumphant way. Ancient Mesopotamian stories can feel colder. They may suggest that humans were made to relieve divine labour, to maintain offerings, to serve temples, to live under decrees they did not choose. Yet these stories also give humans a strange dignity. If humans are needed by the gods, then human actions matter. Bread, beer, song, building, prayer, burial, writing, and memory all become part of a sacred exchange. You imagine a small offering table before a divine image. Bread rests there. A bowl of beer, dates, oil. Perhaps incense smoke rises, slow and blue in the lamplight. The god does not eat as human eats, yet the ritual matters. It says the relationship continues. It says the city is not forgotten. It says humans still know their place in the order of things. Whether you read this as theology, institution, poetry, or social structure, it remains deeply human. People fed what they feared and loved. They gave form to dependence. The Anunnaki enter this question not as a simple answer, but as part of the architecture around it. If they are divine powers linked in some traditions with judgment, assembly, or the ordering of realms, then they belong to the system within which humanity's role was imagined. They stand near questions of who decides, who creates, who rules, who assigns labour, who remembers the dead, and who measures the distance between gods and humans. Some modern interpreters have wondered whether this ancient language conceals a more literal memory. Human beings fashioned, altered, or organised by powers later called gods. In popular Anunnaki theories, humanity becomes a created workforce, perhaps shaped for earthly labour by beings from beyond ordinary human society. This idea has great narrative force, especially because certain Mesopotamian myths do speak of humans being made to take up labour, but the evidence belongs first to the world of ancient myth, temple economy, and theology. To turn it too quickly into a technical report is to lose the older texture of the story. Still, the question remains alive because the myth itself is bold. It does not say humans are accidental. It does not say humans are free from obligation. It does not say humans stand outside the divine world. It says, in one way or another, that humanity has a function. You pass a schoolroom where young scribes copy lists. Their tablets contain signs for gods, cities, professions, animals, measures, and materials. Learning itself becomes a way of entering order. A scribe learns the world by naming it. He learns that a sheep can be counted, a god can be praised, a field can be measured, a king can be recorded, a worker can be assigned, a story can be copied, and a name can be preserved. Writing gives humans a role that animals do not have. It lets them serve memory. Perhaps this is another answer. Humanity was meant to remember, not perfectly unbiased, not completely, but enough to keep names moving forward through time. Museums are filled with evidence of this remembering. Tablets of accounts, hymns, laws, letters, omens, myths, and school exercises. Objects that show humans trying to communicate with gods, organize work, protect homes, legitimize kings, mourn cities, and speak across generations. If the Anunnaki are still present in modern imagination, it is partly because humans did what humans do best. They preserved names, they copied stories, they wondered, they misread, they reinterpreted, they carried fragments into new worlds. The open scholarly uncertainty is whether the surviving elite texts truly reflect what most people believed about humanity's purpose. The scribes, priests, and royal institutions left the strongest written record, but a field worker, a mother, a potter, or a shepherd may have held quieter beliefs that rarely entered formal literature. A household charm, a buried figurine, a personal seal, or a simple offering may reveal another level of faith, but it does not speak in long explanations. The common human heart of Mesopotamia remains partly hidden. You stand in a narrow house at dusk. The walls are warm from the day. A small lamp flickers. A family eats bread and stew. Outside, the temple still rises above the city, but inside the home, life is more immediate. A child is ill. A jar has cracked. A debt must be paid. A dream has troubled someone. A birth is expected. A father worries about grain. A mother murmurs a prayer. Here, humanity's role is not grand. It is intimate, to endure, to protect, to ask for help, to sleep and wake and begin again. Perhaps the gods of the great texts were not always close to such moments. Perhaps people called on smaller protective powers, household rituals, ancestors, local spirits, or personal deities whose names are harder to recover. Perhaps the Anunnaki were distant, part of the high structure of divine order, while ordinary people lived beneath their shadow without speaking their name every day. That distance matters. It reminds you that humanity's role was not only defined from above, it was lived from below. You look toward the museum once more, where human-made objects sit behind glass, a clay figure, a seal, a tablet, a broken statue. Each one was shaped by hands that had their own hunger, fear, skill, and hope. Even if myths say humans were made to serve gods, the artifacts show something more. Humans also made worlds. They made symbols. They made systems. They made beauty. They made memory strong enough to outlive kingdoms. Maybe that is why the old creation stories still disturb us. They ask whether humanity is servant or witness, worker or worshipper, creation or creator, burden bearer or meaning maker. The answer may be all of these, and not always peacefully. You stand beneath the quiet stars, feeling the cool mud underfoot and the warmth of a distant temple lamp on your face. Somewhere, the old stories say, the gods decided what humans would be. Somewhere, the human record answers back, not by denying the gods, but by leaving marks, buildings, songs, seals, and questions. Perhaps humanity was meant to work. Perhaps humanity was meant to remember. Perhaps humanity was meant to ask why it had been given both burdens at once. The night deepens over the river plain, and no final answer comes. Only the soft movement of water, the smell of clay, and the sense that whatever the gods intended, humans became more than silence. They became the ones who left signs behind. You stand once more before a museum label. It is small, rectangular, and calm. It does not tremble beneath the weight of the object it describes. It does not confess uncertainty in a whisper. It does not show the long chain of hands, decisions, translations, damages, politics, and doubts that brought the artifact to this quiet room. It simply waits beside the glass, printed in a clean font, offering the visitor a few lines of guidance. Object, material, date, culture, possible place of origin, brief description, sometimes a donor name, Sometimes a museum number, you read it slowly, and the words begin to feel less simple than they first appeared. A label is not the past. It is a doorway into the past, and like every doorway, it decides where you may enter. If it says votive statue, you approach devotion. If it says administrative tablet, you approach economy. If it says mythological scene, you approach story. If it says deity, you approach religion. If it says possibly, you approach uncertainty. If it says nothing about missing provenance, you may never realize how much of the object's journey has been lost. The label does not sleep. Even after the museum closes, it continues to frame the artifact in silence. You imagine the object beside it, a small clay tablet marked with wedge signs. The label tells you that it records an offering to a deity. It gives a broad period. It identifies the script. Perhaps it notes that cuneiform was written with a reed stylus pressed into clay. All of that is true. But it cannot tell you the sound of the room where the tablet was written. It cannot tell you whether the scribe was tired, whether the clay was too wet, whether a supervisor corrected the account, whether the offering reached the god's table, or whether the person who carried it hoped for rain, healing, safety, or favour. A label gives knowledge. It also creates silence around the knowledge it cannot hold. In ancient Mesopotamia, labels of a different kind existed too. Objects had inscriptions. Kings named themselves on bricks, cones, statues, and stelae. Seals named owners and sometimes invoked gods. Tablets named people, fields, offerings, debts, months, cities, and divine powers. To name something was to place it inside an ordered world. A king's inscription could claim that he built a temple for a god. A seal inscription could identify a servant of a ruler. A tablet could tie a measured amount of barley to a date, a worker, and an institution. The ancient world labelled itself, but never completely. A brick inscription may declare royal devotion, but not the exhaustion of the workers who shaped the bricks. A temple account may list offerings, but not the private prayer spoken by the person who brought them. A myth may name the Anunnaki, but not explain every layer of how different communities imagined them. A god list may arrange divine names, but not restore the full emotional life of worship. Modern labels continue this partial work. They make the object legible, but not whole. You move from one case to another. Here is a cylinder seal with a presentation scene. The label describes a worshipper led before a seated deity. You remember that such scenes can reflect hierarchy, intercession, devotion, and authority. Yet the precise identity of the deity may remain uncertain. The horned crown tells you divinity, but not always the name. A star may suggest celestial association, but not always which god. A staff, vessel, animal, or throne may guide interpretation. But symbols are not always fixed across time. The label may choose caution, seated deity, not Enki, not an Anunnaki lord, just seated deity. Some visitors may find that frustrating. They want the label to speak with force. They want names, not hesitation. They want the object to confirm a story, but the restraint is meaningful. It protects the artifact from being trapped too quickly inside a modern desire. It lets the uncertainty remain visible, if only in a small way. Still, restraint can have its own danger. If the label is too dry, the object seems dead. The visitor moves on. A sacred image becomes a stylistic example. A mythic tablet becomes an old text. A seal becomes a decorative stamp. The ancient world loses its heat, smell, fear, and breath. In trying not to overstate, the museum may under-awaken, and where official language feels lifeless, unofficial imagination rushes in. This is where many Anunnaki stories find room to grow. A visitor sees a label that says little, while the object feels immense. The visitor senses that the museum's words are not enough. Then a video, a book, or a theory offers a more dramatic label. Ancient astronaut, hidden creator, forbidden artifact, suppressed origin. The dramatic label may be less accurate, but it feels more alive. It gives the object a pulse. It replaces caution with revelation. The problem is that revelation can become another kind of cage. A seal scene read only as evidence of extraterrestrial contact can become just as flattened as a seal scene read only as decoration. A divine name treated only as proof of a modern theory loses its ancient religious depth. A tablet forced into a secret timeline may no longer be allowed to be what it is. A fragile text from a specific tradition, written by someone within a world of temples, kings, offerings, labour, and fear. You begin to see that the true challenge is not choosing between dry scholarship and wild speculation. The challenge is finding language soft enough to hold both wonder and discipline. A good label would not claim too much, it would not drain too much. It would tell you what is known, what is uncertain, and why the object matters. It would not pretend that every mystery has been solved. It would not turn every gap into a secret. It would invite you to lean closer without pushing you into fantasy. Perhaps this is what history itself asks of you. Lean closer, do not grab. You stop before a tablet whose label mentions a divine name in a damaged line. The tablet may belong to a hymn, a ritual, or an administrative list. The exact context is debated. The surface is uneven. Part of the text is missing. The label is careful. It does not say more than the evidence allows. Yet the name, even half preserved, carries a current through the room. A god once invoked, counted, praised, feared, or served is still present as a trace. The scholarly uncertainty remains open. How should fragmentary divine references be presented to the public without distorting them? If a tablet mentions a group like the Anunnaki, should the label explain the modern popular theories, or would that give unsupported ideas too much authority? Should it stay within ancient context, even if visitors arrive with questions shaped by modern media? Museums are increasingly aware that objects do not meet neutral audiences. People bring stories with them. The label must speak into that crowded space. It is not easy. Too little explanation leaves misunderstanding. Too much speculation invites confusion. Too much correction can feel cold. Too much enchantment can mislead. You look at the label again and imagine all the invisible labour behind it. A curator drafts it. A specialist checks the identification. An editor cuts it down because space is limited. A designer fits it beside the case. A museum educator wonders whether visitors will understand. A researcher worries about an outdated term. A community member asks why provenance is not clearer. A visitor reads it in 10 seconds and carries away an impression that may last years. A few printed lines become the public face of an ancient world. This is power. Not the same power as kingship descending from heaven, but still power. The power to frame memory. The power to make an object ordinary or extraordinary. The power to connect it with a city, a god, a date, a theory, a culture, or a question. The power to decide whether the Anunnaki appear as ancient divine beings, modern mystery figures, or not at all. You notice the museum lights reflecting on the glass. Your face appears faintly again, layered over the object and its label. For a moment, you are reading the past while seeing yourself. That is always what happens, whether you notice it or not. Every age reads ancient artifacts through its own worries. The ancient scribe read signs through temple order. The king read them through legitimacy. The excavator read them through discovery. The curator reads them through preservation. The modern viewer reads them through longing, doubt, and the suspicion that something remains hidden. The label tries to steady the encounter. It cannot control it completely. Perhaps no label should. You step back. The words remain. The object remains. The uncertainty remains. Nothing dramatic has happened. Yet the room feels changed. You've begun to see that what museums may be hiding is sometimes not behind doors, but inside language. A word can reveal. A word can conceal. A word can narrow the possible world. A word can open it again. The tablet rests behind glass, patient and unread by most who pass. The label stays beside it like a small guardian of meaning. And somewhere between the two, history continues its quiet work, never fully asleep, never fully awake, waiting for someone to notice how much can be hidden in plain sight. You enter the darkened gallery after the last visitor has gone. The museum is not empty. Exactly. It is never empty while the objects remain. It only seems empty because the living have stepped away for the night. The floor reflects faint lines of emergency light. The glass cases hold small pools of shadow. Clay tablets rest in their supports. Seals lie still beside their modern impressions. Stone figures keep their watch. A fragment of a divine crown catches a thread of dimness and gives it back as a dull, ancient gleam. Outside, the city moves in another century. Cars pass, windows glow. Someone walks quickly under streetlights. Somewhere. A phone vibrates. Somewhere. A train slides through the dark, but inside the museum, time has slowed until it feels almost geological. The air is cool, controlled, dry, and still. It smells faintly of stone, wood, clean glass, and old dust hidden beyond public reach. You stand before the Mesopotamian cases one final time. The objects no longer seem arranged as examples. They seem like survivors from separate dreams, gathered by chance into one quiet room. A tablet from an archive, a seal from a hand, a statue from a temple, a cone from a wall, a fragment from a relief, a label from a modern institution. Each one has crossed fire, water, soil, trade, scholarship, and forgetting. Each one has lost something. Each one has kept something. The question that began softly has not disappeared. What might world museums still be hiding about Anunnaki artifacts? But now the question has changed shape. It no longer feels like a demand for a locked chamber or a forbidden object glowing in the dark. It feels older and slower than that. It asks about drawers not yet studied, translations not yet settled, damaged lines not yet joined, private collections not yet examined, contexts lost before anyone understood their value, and labels that must choose a few words for worlds they cannot hold. The hiding may be real, but not always intentional. A tablet may be hidden because no specialist has had time to publish it. A seal may be hidden because its meaning depends on comparison with hundreds of others. A figurine may be hidden because its provenance is uncertain. A divine name may be hidden because translation is difficult. A temple object may be hidden because it was originally made to be buried in a wall. A myth may be hidden because its beginning is broken and its ending is gone. Hiddenness is not one thing. It can be sacred, accidental, bureaucratic, ethical, practical, damaged, protective, or simply human. You look at a tablet whose signs are too small to read from where you stand. Somewhere on such tablets, the names of gods survive. Somewhere in the wider archive of Mesopotamian memory, the Anunnaki appear as part of divine order, changing across texts and periods, sometimes great, sometimes distant, sometimes tied to judgment, sometimes drawn into underworld associations, sometimes difficult to define without narrowing them too much. They are not easily turned into one clear picture. That resistance may be their deepest mystery. A modern theory wants them to become one thing. Ancient evidence lets them remain many things. The mainstream historical world gives you discipline. It asks you to remember that the Anunnaki belong first to Mesopotamian religion, not to modern fantasy. It asks you to distinguish Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian contexts. It asks you to treat myth as myth, ritual as ritual, symbol as symbol, and broken evidence as broken evidence. It asks for patience with grammar, archaeology, provenance, and uncertainty. The mystery world gives you another impulse. It asks why the earliest writing already speaks with such complexity. It asks why myths of creation, flood, divine labour, and heavenly kingship feel so powerful. It asks why objects in museums sometimes seem larger than their labels. It asks why human beings keep returning to the possibility that our beginning is unfinished, that history may have deeper rooms, that memory may have lost more than scholarship can recover. One impulse protects truth, the other protects wonder. The task is to let them sit near each other without letting either one devour the other. You move toward the last unopened drawer in your imagination. It is not in the public gallery. It is below, perhaps, or beyond the staff door, in a storage room where the lights turn on only when needed. The drawer is metal, labelled with numbers. Inside are trays, archival supports, folded notes, small tags, and fragments that do not look important until the right person sees them. A piece of clay, a seal impression, a chipped divine symbol, a tablet corner with 3 clear signs and a broken 4th. You do not open it. The unopened drawer matters because it remains possible, not because it guarantees revelation, but because it reminds you that history is incomplete. Somewhere, there may indeed be an artifact waiting to refine the story of the Anunnaki. It may not change the whole world. It may not satisfy the loudest theories. It may only clarify a title, shift a date, restore a line, identify a local tradition, or show that one divine group was imagined differently in one city than in another. But that would still matter. Ancient history often changes in whispers. A new reading, a small join, a better photograph, a corrected catalogue entry, a forgotten excavation notebook, a local archive reopened, a museum choosing to display what it once stored, a scholar noticing that a fragment long considered ordinary belongs to a myth more complex than anyone realized. This is how the past wakes, not always through thunder, often through dust. You stand in stillness and let the whole story settle. The rivers, the clay, the temples, the labour, the flood, the seals, the labels, the storerooms, the modern imagination, the names that travelled too far and still did not lose their power. The Anunnaki remain neither solved nor dismissed. They remain part of an ancient system that once helped humans speak about authority, creation, judgment, fear, labour, heaven, and the strange burden of being alive beneath powers one cannot fully see. Perhaps the museums are hiding no grand secret. Perhaps they are hiding thousands of small incompletions. And perhaps those small incompletions are enough. Enough to keep the question alive. Enough to make a clay tablet feel awake under glass. Enough to remind you that accepted history is not a finished wall, but a carefully repaired structure with visible cracks. Enough to let you feel, just for a moment, that human memory is a dim gallery where every object is both evidence and shadow. The lights lower further. The tablet does not speak. The seal does not roll. The statue does not blink. The unopened drawer remains closed. And somewhere beyond the museum, beyond the city, beyond the sleeping houses and passing headlights, the old rivers continue moving through the dark, carrying silt, memory, and silence toward lands where people once shaped clay and asked the gods why they had been made. Perhaps the answer was written. Perhaps it was broken. Perhaps it is still waiting, not in a forbidden vault, but in the patient space between what survives and what we're ready to understand. Word count 1181. The gallery fades into a softer darkness now, and there is no need to hold every question tightly. The clay can rest. The old gods can return to the distance where ancient names belong. The museum cases can become only pale rectangles in the sleeping mind, each one holding a fragment of a world that does not ask to be solved tonight. You may imagine the rivers under starlight, moving quietly past reed beds and ruined mounds. You may imagine a scribe setting down his stylus, a worker washing mud from his hands, a temple lamp burning low, a sealed drawer waiting without impatience. Nothing demands an answer. Nothing needs to be forced into certainty. Perhaps the past is kindest when it remains partly unfinished. It gives the mind somewhere to wander. It gives sleep a corridor of stone, clay, water, and shadow. It lets wonder breathe without becoming fear. So let the Anunnaki remain where they belong for now, in the layered space between text and myth, scholarship and dream, memory and silence. Let the museums close their doors. Let the labels sleep beside the objects. Let the unanswered lines stay broken until another dawn, another reader, another careful hand. The night is deep. The old cities are quiet. The stars above Mesopotamia shine in the same patient darkness they always have. Over temples gone to dust and rivers still moving through time. And you can drift now, gently, with no conclusion to chase. Only the soft feeling that somewhere in clay or glass or dream, history is still breathing. End of script. Good night.